I emptied my entire life savings to buy a run-down, abandoned gas station in Texas. The day I signed the contract, my family called me a fool and a hopeless failure. My brother laughed in my face. But what they did not know was that the rusted safe hidden beneath the floorboards held a secret that would soon bring a $4 billion tech giant to my doorstep and completely destroy my toxic family. I am Danielle, 33 years old, and a former corporate financial auditor. Last Sunday, I walked into my parents' dining room and slammed a thick manila folder onto the polished mahogany table. Inside that folder was the deed to a dilapidated 1970s gas station on the outskirts of Austin. I had just spent $150,000 in cash to acquire it. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family who constantly underestimated your worth and treated you like a second-class citizen. Growing up in our household meant constantly living in the shadow of my older brother Derek. At 35, Derek was the golden child, the self-proclaimed real estate mogul of the family, who could do no wrong in the eyes of my parents, Richard and Patricia. Every Sunday dinner was a mandatory performance, where we were all expected to sit around the table, eat dry roast beef, and applaud whatever mediocre accomplishment Derek was bragging about that week. I had recently resigned from my high-stress auditing job due to severe burnout, a decision my family viewed as an unforgivable weakness. To them, my stepping away from an 80-hour work week to preserve my health was proof that I was exactly what they always suspected, a fragile failure. I stood at the end of the dining table, my hand resting on the manila folder. The clinking of heavy silver forks against porcelain plates stopped. Derek looked up from his wine glass, his perfectly styled hair gleaming under the chandelier. Beside him sat his wife Kendra. Kendra was a striking African-American woman of 34, a corporate lawyer who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone in the room of her billing rate. She sat rigidly in her chair, draped head to toe in Chanel, her sharp eyes scanning me with her usual expression of thinly veiled disgust. "I bought the old Gulf Station property off Route 9, I said, keeping my voice entirely neutral. The title cleared this morning. I own it free and clear." For 3 agonizing seconds, the room was completely silent. Then Derek burst into a loud theatrical bark of laughter. He actually tipped his head back and laughed so hard he choked, spitting a mouthful of expensive red wine back into his glass. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, shaking his head as if I had just told the most hilarious joke he had ever heard in his life. "A gas station!" Derek wheezed, his face turning red. "You bought an abandoned toxic waste dump from the 70s, Danielle. Please tell me you are joking. Tell me you did not just flush your entire savings down the toilet for a pile of rust and rat droppings." I did not flinch. "I am not joking," I replied. "It is an investment." Kendra let out a slow, condescending sigh. She placed her fork down with deliberate care and folded her manicured hands together, leaning forward to look at me as if I were a confused toddler wandering into traffic. "Danielle," she began, utilizing that smooth, patronizing tone she reserved for hostile witnesses, "have you stopped taking your medication? Because purchasing a commercially unviable, environmentally hazardous property without consulting a legal professional is not an investment. It is evidence of severe mental instability. You do realize you are now personally liable for any soil contamination on that site, correct? You are going to bankrupt yourself before the year is over." My mother, Patricia, immediately gasped, bringing a hand to her pearl necklace. "Oh, my lord," she wailed, turning to my father. "Richard, do you hear this? She is going to be ruined. We are going to have to bail her out again. I have never asked you for a single dime since I turned 18, I reminded her calmly. But facts never mattered in this house. The narrative was already set. My father slammed his fist onto the table, making the crystal water glasses rattle. "You are a hopeless failure, Danielle," he shouted, his face contorting with rage. "You throw away a perfectly good accounting career because you claim you are too tired, and now you blow your life savings on garbage. You have absolutely no business sense. None. You need to stop this nonsense right now. You are going to beg your brother for a low-level bookkeeping job at his firm." Maybe if you organize his files and answer his phones, you can learn how real business is done. Derek smirked, swirling the wine in his glass. I do not know, Dad. My firm handles high-value assets. I am not sure I can trust her not to mess up the petty cash. But I suppose I could pay her minimum wage out of pity. Family takes care of family, right? They sat there, a unified front of arrogance and disdain, waiting for me to lower my head, apologize, and accept my role as the family loser. But the woman who used to cry in her bedroom after these dinners was dead. In her place was an auditor. And an auditor does not argue with emotions. An auditor looks at the balance sheet. I looked directly at Derek, allowing a cold, calculated smile to touch my lips. You handle high-value assets, Derek, I asked softly. That is fascinating, because from where I am standing, the only thing you handle is a facade. What is that supposed to mean? Derek snapped his smirk, faltering slightly. I pointed to his left wrist. It means your Rolex Submariner has a ticking second hand. A real Rolex features a sweeping motion. Yours is a cheap replica likely purchased online for about $200. You wear it to project success to clients you are desperately trying to court, but anyone with a trained eye knows you are faking it. Derek's face flushed a deep, violent purple. He instinctively pulled his arm off the table, hiding the watch beneath the edge. You shut your mouth, he hissed. You do not know what you are talking about. I did not stop. I turned my gaze to Kendra, whose eyes had widened in shock at my sudden retaliation. And Kendra. I continued, my voice steady and surgical. Your corporate salary is certainly impressive, but it is clearly not impressive enough to cover the lifestyle you project. That vintage Chanel jacket is beautiful, but I noticed the hardware is oxidizing, meaning you bought it heavily discounted from a second-hand consignment shop. More importantly, when I helped you both set up your mail forwarding last month, I could not help but notice the collection warnings from American Express. You are carrying at least $60,000 in revolving credit card debt across 3 different platinum cards. You are paying minimums at a 24% interest rate. Mathematically speaking, you are both functionally insolvent. The dining room exploded. Kendra shot up from her chair so fast it tipped backward and crashed into the wall. How dare you, she screamed, completely dropping her polished lawyer persona. Her hands were shaking with raw fury. You invade my privacy. You look through my mail. I will have you arrested. I will sue you for everything you have left. My father stood up, towering over the table, his face a mask of absolute fury. He marched around the chairs, grabbed my upper arm with a bruising grip, and yanked me backward. You arrogant, ungrateful little brat! He roared, his spit flying into my face. You dare come into my house and insult your brother? You dare insult his wife? After everything we have done for you, let go of me, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register. I stared directly into his eyes, not showing a single ounce of fear. I felt his grip loosen just a fraction, surprised by my utter lack of submission. I jerked my arm out of his grasp and took a step back, straightening my posture. Get out of my house, my father commanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the front door. Get out and do not come back until you are ready to get on your knees and apologize to Derek and Kendra. My mother was already crying her strategic weaponized tears. You are breaking this family apart, Danielle, Patricia sobbed, clutching her napkin. You are completely out of the family will. Do you hear me? I am calling the lawyer tomorrow. You will not get a single cent from us unless you transfer that gas station deed over to Derek immediately. He is the only one who knows real estate. He can flip that garbage property and salvage whatever tiny bit of money you have left. If you do not sign it over to him, you are dead to us. Kendra was hyperventilating furiously, pacing behind her fallen chair. I am filing a lawsuit tomorrow morning, she yelled, her voice echoing through the vaulted ceiling of the dining room. I am a corporate attorney, Danielle. I know exactly how to destroy you. I will bury you in litigation for intentional infliction of emotional distress. I will file an injunction. I will drag you through civil court until you cannot afford to eat, let alone maintain some toxic dump of a property. You messed with the wrong woman. I stood completely still watching them unravel. Their reaction was completely disproportionate, a chaotic symphony of screaming threats and physical intimidation. They were like a failing corporation trying to hide their bankruptcy behind aggressive marketing. My mother was offering to steal my property under the guise of helping me. My brother was hiding his humiliation behind my father's anger. And Kendra was throwing out baseless, ridiculous legal threats because her financial secrets had been dragged into the light. "You are going to sue me for emotional distress because I pointed out your credit card debt?" I asked Kendra, my tone laced with heavy sarcasm. "Good luck explaining those damages to a judge. Any competent opposing counsel will subpoena your financial records in discovery, and your entire firm will see exactly how broke you really are. Is that a risk you want to take?" Kendra stopped pacing. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She knew I was right. The threat of public exposure was the ultimate paralyzer for someone whose entire identity was built on a lie. I turned my back on them and walked unhurriedly into the foyer. I retrieved my wool coat from the closet and slipped it on, taking my time to adjust the collar. Behind me, the screaming started again. My father was yelling about respect. Derek was cursing at me, calling me every derogatory name he could think of to rebuild his shattered ego. My mother was wailing about how I had ruined Sunday dinner. I opened the heavy oak front door. The cool night air rushed in clean and sharp, contrasting with the suffocating atmosphere of the house. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel the familiar crushing weight of guilt that had plagued me for my entire adult life. For the first time, looking at my screaming family, I felt nothing but a profound, liberating emptiness. The boundary was finally set. I stepped out onto the porch, paused, and looked back at the four of them standing in the hallway, their faces twisted in ugly, hateful snarls. "Keep your will," I said quietly, though my voice carried perfectly in the tense silence that briefly fell over them. "And keep your fake watches. I will keep my property." I pulled the door shut behind me, the heavy click of the deadbolt echoing like a gunshot in the quiet suburban night. I walked down the paved driveway to my practical 10-year-old sedan. As I started the engine and pulled away from the manicured lawn of my childhood prison, my phone was already buzzing with unhinged text messages from Derek and Kendra. I did not bother reading them. I placed my phone on silent, put the car in drive, and headed toward the outskirts of Austin. They thought I had bought a worthless piece of garbage. They thought they had successfully exiled the weakest link of the family. They had no idea that beneath the dust and rust of that old gas station, I was about to unearth a secret that would make me untouchable. The next morning at dawn, I parked my sedan on the cracked asphalt of the old Gulf station. The rising Texas sun cast long shadows over the rusted vintage fuel pumps and the collapsed canopy. I did not waste time staring at the decay. I popped my trunk, grabbed a heavy-duty flashlight and a pair of industrial bolt cutters I had purchased at a hardware store on my way out of the city. I walked straight past the shattered glass of the main storefront and headed toward the back storage room of the convenience store. According to the county property blueprints I had meticulously reviewed before placing my cash bid, the square footage of the main building did not align with the exterior foundation measurements. There was an unaccounted-for discrepancy of roughly 2,000 square feet. My family thought I had bought the property blindly, driven by some emotional breakdown. They failed to realize an auditor never invests without a forensic analysis of the physical assets. Inside the storage room, the air was thick and stagnant. I kicked aside piles of rotted cardboard boxes and dragged a collapsed steel display rack away from the far wall. Behind it, exactly where the structural anomaly suggested it would be, sat a heavy reinforced steel door set flush into the concrete block wall. It was secured by a massive oxidized iron padlock. I positioned the bolt cutters over the shackle, braced my weight, and snapped the lock with a sharp crack. I pulled the heavy door open. It groaned on its hinges, revealing a steep concrete staircase descending into absolute darkness. A rush of cold, perfectly dry air swept up to greet me. I clicked on my high-beam flashlight and began my descent. This was not a basement. The reinforced concrete walls, the thick rubber seals around the doorframe, and the heavy-duty ventilation shafts indicated a fully fortified Cold War-era bunker. Someone with serious capital had built this space decades ago and then completely sealed it off from the world. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, I swept my flashlight across the cavernous room. I immediately shifted into professional mode. I pulled out my digital tablet and began to conduct a systematic inventory of the space. I did not allow myself to feel excitement or fear. I only saw assets and liabilities. The bunker was roughly 40 feet wide by 50 feet deep. I measured the thickness of the concrete walls by examining the doorframe. 2 feet of solid reinforced masonry. The cost to construct this space alone in today's money would exceed $500,000. Every square inch of this subterranean vault represented pure, unadulterated equity. The walls were lined with industrial steel shelving, holding military-grade survival rations, all expired, but perfectly preserved in airtight containers. I documented the structural integrity of the load-bearing pillars. I photographed the heavy-duty diesel generator sitting in the corner, noting its make and model for future appraisal. Then my flashlight beam hit the center of the room. Taking up the majority of the floor space was a massive object covered by a heavy, dust-caked canvas tarp. I walked over, grabbed the edge of the canvas, and pulled it back. The tarp slid off heavily to the floor, raising a small cloud of particulate matter. Beneath it sat a vehicle. But this was not just any abandoned car. It was a 1971 Plymouth Hemi-Cuda. The paint was a flawless mirror finish violet. There was not a single speck of rust on the chrome bumpers. I leaned closer, shining my light through the driver's side window. The interior was pristine black leather, completely untouched by time or sunlight. I walked around to the front of the vehicle and recorded the vehicle identification number visible through the windshield. I ran the sequence through an encrypted appraisal database on my tablet. The results loaded instantly. The car was a numbers matching original factory condition Hemi-Cuda, one of only a handful ever produced with these specific options. I checked the factory build sheet tucked carefully under the passenger seat visor, confirming the matching numbers for the engine block and transmission. The rubber seals around the doors were still supple, preserved by the absolute lack of humidity in the bunker. It had never been registered. The odometer read exactly 14 miles. In the current collector car market, this vehicle was easily worth $2 million at auction. My brother Derek drove a leased Porsche he could barely afford the monthly payments on. He threw money away on depreciating assets to impress people he despised. I thought about Kendra sitting at my parents' dining table, clutching her oxidized Chanel jacket and threatening to sue me for emotional distress. She spent her days manipulating the law to protect her husband's crushing debt. I spent my morning auditing a multi-million-dollar subterranean asset that belonged entirely to me. I documented the car from every angle, making detailed notes on the condition of the tires, the glass, and the undercarriage. I treated it exactly as I would a corporate balance sheet. Emotion is the enemy of wealth. Data is power. I stepped away from the car and continued my sweep of the perimeter. At the far end of the bunker, tucked behind a stack of empty steel oil drums, I spotted a heavy floor-mounted safe. I moved the drums aside to get a clearer look. It was a commercial-grade Mosler safe, heavily rusted on the exterior, featuring a massive brass combination dial and a heavy lever handle. I ran my fingers over the cold metal. The rust was purely cosmetic, a product of minor surface oxidation, but the structural integrity of the safe was completely uncompromised. I pulled a small microfiber cloth from my pocket and wiped the face of the dial. The brass gleamed faintly under the flashlight beam. I pressed my ear against the cold steel door and gave the dial a slow, deliberate spin. The internal tumblers clicked with heavy mechanical precision. I tried the handle. It was locked tight. There was no keyhole, only the spinning dial. This was not the type of safe you could pry open with a crowbar or blow apart with amateur explosives. It required professional cracking or the exact combination. I knelt on the cold concrete and examined the dial closely. I took a high-resolution photograph of the manufacturer's serial number stamped on the bottom hinge. I stood up and brushed the dust from my knees. I had purchased this property for the land knowing the exact value of the commercial zoning rights, but finding a $2 million collector car and a fortified safe was a statistical anomaly that required immediate reassessment of my net worth. I walked back toward the stairs, pulling out my phone. The signal was dead underground. I needed to get back to the surface to contact a specialized wealth management firm and secure a professional safecracker. The contents of that rusted safe were about to change the trajectory of my entire life, and I was going to ensure that my toxic family never saw a single penny of it. I drove back to my apartment, grabbed my high-performance laptop, a portable generator, and a professional-grade mechanic's stethoscope. By noon, I was back in the subterranean silence of the bunker. The heavy Mosler safe sat impassively in the beam of my LED work lights. I clamped the stethoscope earpieces into place and pressed the acoustic bell against the cold steel next to the brass dial. I closed my eyes, tuning out the world. As an auditor, I spent years listening for microscopic inconsistencies in financial statements. Now I listened for the mechanical drop of brass tumblers. I spun the dial right, waiting for the distinct metallic click, signaling the first gate engaging. It took 3 agonizing hours of methodical precision movements. My fingers cramped, but my focus never wavered. At exactly 3:14 in the afternoon, the fourth tumbler dropped into place with a heavy, satisfying thud, reverberating through the concrete floor. I pulled the lever handle downward, and the massive door swung open with a rusted groan. The heavy safe interior was lined with thick, decaying velvet. Resting on the center shelf was a thick, waterproof leather portfolio. I unrolled its contents on the hood of the pristine Hemi-Cuda under the bright glare of my work light. Inside were original hand-drawn county zoning blueprints dated October 14, 1974. They bore the official seal of the Travis County Planning Commission, countersigned by the chief municipal surveyor. I fired up my laptop connected to a portable satellite uplink and logged into the secure county property database. I pulled up current topological and zoning grids for the entire sector. I overlaid the digital maps onto the physical blueprints, comparing boundaries, easements, and right-of-way designations line by line. My eyes darted between the glowing screen and the yellowed parchment. I cross-referenced historical building codes against modern environmental protection statutes enacted over the last 50 years. Suddenly, the numbers clicked into place. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. Behind my gas station lay a massive, undeveloped 500-acre valley. According to modern digital grids, that valley was completely landlocked by protected environmental wetlands on 3 sides and a steep, unbuildable granite ridge on the 4th. State law explicitly prohibited any commercial construction or road paving over those protected wetlands. The only physical way in or out of that massive expanse of land was through a narrow, commercially zoned corridor. I looked down at the 1974 blueprints. My gas station did not just sit near that corridor. My property line extended perfectly across the entire width of it. I owned the only legally zoned access road to 500 acres of prime Texas real estate. Anyone who ever wanted to develop that valley would have to go through me. They could not build around me. They could not tunnel under me. They were legally and geographically trapped by the deed sitting securely in my manila folder. The implications were staggering. I was no longer just the owner of a dilapidated building and a classic car. I was the absolute gatekeeper to a multi-million-dollar development choke point. If a major corporation ever set their sights on that valley, my small strip of cracked asphalt would become the most expensive toll booth in the entire state. My heart pounded, but my mind remained ice cold. I knew exactly what Kendra and Derek would do if they ever caught wind of this leverage. Kendra would use every dirty legal trick in her corporate playbook to contest my ownership. She would file frivolous injunctions to freeze the asset. Derek would try to forge documents or manipulate my parents into forcing a sale through emotional blackmail. I could not leave these blueprints in the bunker, and I certainly could not take them back to my unsecured apartment. I carefully rolled the blueprints back into the leather portfolio. I locked the empty safe, powered down my equipment, and drove straight back to the city. I bypassed my usual local bank and headed directly to the downtown high-rise offices of Apex Financial, one of the most ruthless and discreet private wealth management firms in Texas. I did not have an appointment, but the moment I walked into their marble lobby and casually mentioned to the receptionist that I needed to establish an irrevocable trust for a commercial land asset possessing extreme strategic leverage, the managing partner practically ran out of his glass office to greet me. His name was Mr. Caldwell, a sharp-eyed financial bulldog who charged $1,000 an hour and asked absolutely zero unnecessary questions. We sat in his soundproof conference room overlooking the Austin skyline. I laid the leather portfolio on the polished mahogany table and explained the exact geographical choke point I now controlled. I watched his professional composure crack as he analyzed the historical documents against the current county grids. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and profound professional respect. "You understand exactly what you have here," Danielle Caldwell asked, sliding the blueprints back across the table. "You hold the absolute monopoly on access to that valley. If any developer tries to move in, you dictate the terms. I want these documents placed in your most secure biometric vault immediately," I instructed him, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "And I want to restructure my ownership of the property today. I need you to place the deed to the gas station into a blind, irrevocable trust. I want it legally fortified behind so many corporate shell layers that if any outside attorney tries to look it up, they will hit an absolute brick wall." Caldwell smiled a sharp, predatory grin that told me I had chosen the right firm. "Consider it done. We will make your ownership bulletproof. By the time anyone realizes who actually controls that land, it will be far too late for them to challenge it." I signed the retainer agreement, paid his exorbitant fee up front, using the last remnants of my savings account, and walked out of the high-rise building with a customized encrypted access key to my brand-new vault. I stepped out onto the bustling city street, blending seamlessly into the afternoon crowd. My family was probably still sitting in their house plotting ways to force me into a minimum-wage bookkeeping job, convinced they had completely broken my spirit. They believed I was nothing but a fragile, exhausted failure, drowning in a terrible investment. They were completely blind to the fact that the quiet, compliant daughter they had just kicked out of their home had just transformed into a ghost holding the keys to an absolute empire. The trap was meticulously set. All I had to do now was wait patiently for the right prey to step into it. For exactly 14 days, I went about my life with the disciplined routine of a ghost. I ignored the relentless barrage of text messages from my mother demanding apologies, and I sent Derek's incoming calls straight to voicemail. I spent my time analyzing market trends, tracking corporate land acquisitions, and waiting for the inevitable catalyst. It arrived on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen island sipping black coffee when the breaking news alert flashed across my financial terminal. Titan Global, one of the top 5 technology conglomerates in the world, had officially announced their latest mega project. They were calling it the Silicon Valley of the South, a state-of-the-art $4 billion corporate campus and research facility. The location was the exact 500-acre valley sitting directly behind my rusted gas station. The press release painted a picture of futuristic glass towers, artificial lakes, and a workforce of 10,000 high-paid engineers flooding into the county. The local politicians were ecstatic, holding press conferences, and completely blinded by the promise of unprecedented tax revenue. But as an auditor, I do not read press releases for the promises. I read them for the omissions. The glossy digital renderings of the Titan campus were beautiful, but they conveniently cropped out the southern boundary of the property. They cropped out the granite ridge to the north and the federally protected wetlands to the east and west. By the end of the day, independent financial analysts began poking holes in Titan's grand announcement. The logistics did not add up. A $4 billion construction project requires a continuous convoy of heavy machinery, concrete mixers, and steel transport trucks. You cannot airlift thousands of tons of raw materials into a landlocked valley. Local news stations began flying drones over the site, and the media quickly realized that Titan Global had aggressively purchased the valley from a desperate holding company, but they had completely failed to secure the single commercial access corridor leading into it. That corridor was owned by an anonymous, irrevocable trust, my trust. By Wednesday morning, Titan Global's stock price took a slight but noticeable dip, as investors questioned the competency of their land acquisition division. The tech giant was publicly trapped holding a massive piece of unusable land. They could not move a single bulldozer without crossing my exact property line. They found me on Thursday afternoon. Despite the layers of corporate shielding Mr. Caldwell had erected at Apex Financial, a company with Titan's unlimited resources was bound to eventually track down the individual beneficiary. My cell phone rang. The caller ID displayed a blocked number. I let it ring 3 times before sliding my finger across the screen to accept the call. I did not say hello. I just listened. "Am I speaking with Danielle?" a voice asked. The tone was sharp, fast-paced, and dripping with unearned authority. "This is Danielle," I replied, my voice perfectly level. "My name is Bradley," the voice said, completely ignoring common courtesy. "I am a senior acquisition agent for Titan Global. I am going to save us both a lot of time, Danielle. We know you are the beneficiary of the trust holding the abandoned Gulf station on Route 9. We also know the property is an environmental liability that will cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars to remediate. We are willing to take that burden off your hands. I am prepared to offer you an aggressive cash buyout today. $1.2 million. That is nearly 10 times what you paid for it. We email the contract, now you sign it, and you walk away a millionaire." I took a slow sip of my coffee. I could hear the aggressive hum of a busy corporate office in the background of his call. He was treating me like a lottery winner, hoping to overwhelm me with a big number and a false sense of urgency. "Bradley," I said calmly, "your offer is mathematically insulting, and your negotiation tactic is embarrassing." There was a brief, stunned silence on the line. "Excuse me," he snapped. I opened my laptop and pulled up my spreadsheet. "You are attempting to leverage a false environmental liability against me." I conducted a Phase 1 environmental site assessment before I purchased the property. The underground storage tanks were properly decommissioned and filled with inert foam in 1998. There is zero soil contamination. My liability is non-existent. Now let us discuss your liability. Titan Global is hemorrhaging millions in daily operational delays because your division failed to do their due diligence. You cannot move a single backhoe into that valley without trespassing on my commercial zoning right-of-way. "Listen to me," Bradley interrupted, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "We are Titan Global. We do not get held hostage by amateur real estate flippers. If you do not play ball, our legal department will bury you. We will petition the county for an emergency easement. We will tie you up in litigation for the next decade until you are completely bankrupt. I am going to revise my offer one time. $2 million. Take it or we destroy you." I let his threat hang in the air for a moment, absorbing the sheer arrogance of his strategy. He was relying on intimidation, the exact same tactic my family had used against me for 33 years. You cannot petition for an emergency easement through a commercially zoned choke point when alternative access, no matter how expensive or geographically impossible, theoretically exists, I countered, citing the exact Texas property statutes my lawyer and I had reviewed. Your legal threats are entirely toothless. As for your $2 million offer, that might cover the cost of the classic car sitting in the bunker beneath my property, but it does not even begin to approach the value of the land. "Are you insane?" Bradley yelled, his professional composure completely shattering. "We are offering you $2 million for a strip of cracked asphalt. You are offering me $2 million to save your $4 billion project," I corrected him. "Your valuation is severely misaligned with reality. Do not call this number again unless you are ready to speak to me like a business partner instead of a nuisance." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on the granite counter. Titan Global was bleeding, and they knew it. The $2 million offer was a desperate attempt to plug the wound. They thought they were dealing with a naive woman who would be terrified by their corporate lawyers. They were wrong. I was an auditor, and I knew exactly how to balance a ledger. Titan Global was going to pay the true price of admission, but before I could finalize my masterpiece, I knew my family would inevitably try to insert themselves into the equation. The scent of money was in the water, and the sharks were about to start circling. The very next morning, the knock on my apartment door came exactly at 8. I looked through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway of my low-rent complex were Derek and Kendra. They looked entirely out of place. Derek was wearing a tailored navy suit, and Kendra was clutching 2 large cups of artisanal coffee, her perfectly pressed beige trench coat contrasting sharply with the peeling paint of my doorframe. They were both wearing wide, perfectly rehearsed smiles. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. I did not invite them in, but Derek pushed past me anyway, handing me one of the coffee cups. "Good morning, Danielle," he said, his voice dripping with an artificial warmth that made my skin crawl. "We brought you your favorite, oat milk latte extra hot. We know we surprised you, but we really needed to talk. Sunday night got completely out of hand, and I feel terrible about it." Kendra stepped inside behind him, carefully sidestepping a slightly lifted floorboard. She offered a sympathetic sigh, resting her manicured hand briefly on my arm. "Your father has a terrible temper, Danielle. You know how he gets. We all said things we regret. Derek and I have barely slept this week worrying about you. We want to make things right." I walked over to my cheap Formica kitchen table and set the coffee down untouched. I slipped my hand into my cardigan pocket, unlocked my phone, and silently hit the record button on my voice memo application. Then I pulled out a chair and sat down, gesturing for them to take the seats opposite me. "Make things right," how I asked, maintaining a perfectly blank expression. Derek unbuttoned his suit jacket and sat down, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the table to project an image of open honesty. "Look, Danielle, you made a rash decision. You were burnt out from your job. You were stressed, and you bought a piece of commercial real estate without understanding the liabilities. I am your big brother. It is my job to protect you. I spoke with some of my private equity partners yesterday. I convinced them to let me absorb the gas station into my commercial portfolio." Kendra reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick document secured with a heavy brass clip. She slid it smoothly across the table until it rested right in front of me. "We are willing to buy the property from you today for $200,000, Kendra said, her voice soft and persuasive. "That covers the $150,000 you spent, plus a very generous $50,000 profit for your trouble. It is a clean exit, Danielle. You walk away with cash in hand, and Derek assumes all the environmental and municipal liabilities." I looked down at the contract. It was 50 pages of dense, single-spaced legal formatting. I looked back up at Kendra, playing the role of the overwhelmed, exhausted younger sister. $200,000, I asked, letting a hint of fake vulnerability slip into my voice. "But Kendra, on Sunday you said I was personally liable for soil contamination. You said the property was an environmental hazard that would bankrupt me. Why would Derek take on a toxic waste dump just to give me a profit?" Derek puffed out his chest. "Because you are family, Danielle. I am willing to take the financial hit so you do not have to. My firm has the capital to handle the remediation. You do not." I pulled the document closer and flipped to the third page. I ran my finger down the text, letting the silence stretch out. The recording app in my pocket was capturing every breath. "I am just a little confused by some of the terminology here," I said, tapping the page. "Kendra, you drafted this, right? Can you explain Section 4, Paragraph B, the assignment of reciprocal easement rights? It states that I am irrevocably transferring any and all future development rights, including subterranean and adjacent corridor access, in perpetuity. If this is just a contaminated gas station, why do you need an assignment of adjacent corridor rights?" Kendra blinked, clearly surprised that I had instantly pinpointed the most predatory clause in the document. She quickly recovered with a condescending smile. Oh, that is just standard boilerplate language for commercial acquisitions, Danielle. It just protects Derek from any frivolous zoning disputes with the county. You do not need to worry about the legal jargon. That is what I am here for. I flipped to page 12. And what about the indemnification and hold harmless agreement? I read it aloud. Seller unconditionally waives all rights to future claims regarding property appreciation, corporate zoning modifications, and third-party development revenues discovered post-transaction. I looked up, meeting Kendra's eyes directly. That is a very specific clause, Kendra. It almost sounds like you are expecting a massive third-party development to occur, and you want to ensure I can never sue you for a cut of the profits. Why would you include a waiver for third-party development revenue if the land is commercially unviable? Derek shifted uncomfortably in his chair, glancing nervously at his wife. Kendra just let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. Danielle, you are overthinking this, she said, her tone growing slightly sharper. You are an auditor, not a corporate attorney. You deal in past expenses. I deal in future risk mitigation. This contract is heavily skewed to favor the buyer, because the buyer is taking on a massive, highly speculative risk. Yes, the terms are aggressive. Yes, you are waiving all future rights to any potential revenue. But that is the price you pay for an immediate cash bailout. You are holding a dead asset. We are offering you a lifeline. So just to be completely clear, I said, ensuring my voice was loud enough for the microphone in my pocket to pick up every syllable. You admit this contract is aggressively skewed to favor Derek. You are advising me as an attorney and a family member to sign away all future adjacent development rights and any third-party revenue, knowing full well that I am unrepresented by outside legal counsel today. Kendra leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She was so arrogant, so utterly convinced of her own intellectual superiority that she walked right into the trap. Absolutely, she stated firmly. Because outside legal counsel would cost you $10,000 just to read this document, and they would tell you exactly what I am telling you. You have no leverage. You have a contaminated, landlocked property. If you do not sign this today, Derek will withdraw the offer. You will be stuck with the property taxes, the remediation fines, and a completely worthless piece of dirt. Sign the contract, Danielle. I closed the document and pushed it back across the table. I kept my face entirely impassive. It is a very generous offer, Derek, I said softly. But as an auditor, I have a strict personal policy against signing binding legal documents without conducting a 48-hour financial review. I will read this over the weekend and give you my final decision by Monday morning. Derek slammed his hand on the table, dropping the caring brother act instantly. Danielle, this is a limited time offer. I have investors waiting. You cannot just string me along. Kendra put a hand on Derek's arm, silently warning him to calm down. She stood up and smoothed out her trench coat. Take the weekend, Danielle, Kendra said, her voice dripping with venomous certainty. But remember, come Monday, the offer drops to $150,000. Every day you wait, you lose money. We are trying to save you, but we will not wait forever. I stood up and opened the apartment door for them. Thank you for the coffee, I said quietly. They walked out. Derek shaking his head in disgust, and Kendra marching down the hall with her chin held high. They actually believed they had intimidated me. They thought I was sitting at my cheap kitchen table, paralyzed by fear and indecision. I locked the door behind them, pulled my phone from my pocket, and stopped the recording. I pressed play, listening to the crystal-clear audio of Kendra explicitly admitting to predatory terms and coercing an unrepresented party. I smiled. She had just handed me the exact piece of evidence I would need to report her to the State Bar Association for severe ethical violations. The fake olive branch had just become the rope she would use to hang her own career. Now it was time to let Titan Global bleed just a little bit more before I moved in for the final kill. At precisely 8 o'clock on Monday morning, my phone vibrated against the granite kitchen counter. The caller ID displayed Derek's name. I placed the phone in the center of the table, tapped the speaker icon, and simultaneously activated my secondary digital audio recorder. I did not offer a greeting. I simply waited. Well, Derek demanded. His voice was tight, lacking the fake warmth he had projected in my apartment. I have the wire transfer ready to authorize Danielle. Tell me you signed the paperwork so I can send my courier to pick it up. We have wasted enough time on this. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. I have completed my financial review of the contract, I stated, keeping my tone entirely conversational and devoid of urgency. After careful consideration of the indemnification clauses and the assignment of reciprocal easement rights, I have decided to decline your offer. I will not be signing the document. Furthermore, the property is no longer for sale at any price. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds before Derek completely lost his temper. "Are you out of your mind?" Derek shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "I am offering you a guaranteed exit strategy. You are holding a contaminated liability. If you do not sell it to me today, you are going to lose everything." Before I could respond, Kendra snatched the phone from him. The polished, condescending attorney who had stood in my living room was gone. In her place was a vicious corporate attack dog who was not used to being told no by someone she considered her intellectual inferior. "Listen to me very carefully, Danielle," Kendra hissed, her words clipping together with surgical precision. "You are playing a very dangerous game with people who possess significantly more power, capital, and influence than you could ever comprehend. You think you are being clever. You think holding out will somehow force us to increase the offer. You are grossly miscalculating your leverage." I remained absolutely silent. In auditing, silence is the ultimate weapon. When you do not react, the target inevitably fills the void with their own panic, revealing their hidden liabilities. Kendra took the bait perfectly. "Since you want to play hardball, let me explain exactly what is going to happen next." Kendra continued, her voice vibrating with malice. "I am a senior partner at a top-tier corporate law firm. I play golf with the county zoning commissioner. I routinely host fundraising dinners for the municipal city council. By tomorrow morning, I am filing a formal petition of condemnation against your property with the county clerk." I reached out and adjusted the microphone of my digital recorder, ensuring it captured every single threat. "I am going to use my connections to have the city declare your rusting, dilapidated gas station a severe public health hazard and an environmental blight on the commercial corridor," Kendra explained, completely abandoning any pretense of ethical legal practice. Under Chapter 21 of the Texas Property Code, the municipality possesses the absolute right of eminent domain. They will seize your property for public use. They will send a state appraiser who will value your toxic dump at perhaps $40,000 or $50,000. The city will forcibly evict you, issue you a microscopic check, and then auction the cleared, remediated land straight to Derek's holding company. You hear that Danielle, Derek chimed in, his voice dripping with arrogant satisfaction. "You should have taken the 200 grand when I was being generous. You are playing in the big leagues now. You are going to walk away with nothing but legal bills." "Are you quite finished?" I asked quietly. "We will crush you, Danielle," Kendra snarled. "You have exactly 1 hour to change your mind. Call us back when you are ready to beg." The line went dead. I smiled, saving the audio file to my encrypted cloud server. Kendra had just explicitly outlined a conspiracy to commit fraud, abuse of power, and malicious prosecution. She had confirmed her intent to leverage political connections to steal private property for personal gain. It was a career-ending admission, captured in high-definition audio. But the fallout from my refusal did not end with Kendra. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the emotional artillery barrage from my parents began. They had clearly been briefed by Derek, who undoubtedly spun a narrative framing me as a greedy, vindictive monster trying to sabotage his success. My phone lit up with a voicemail notification from my father, Richard. I played it through the speaker. "You are a selfish, greedy little brat, Danielle," my father roared into the receiver, the background noise indicating he was pacing furiously around his house. "Derek is trying to save you from bankruptcy and you spit in his face. Do you have any idea what you are doing? Your brother has a massive multi-million-dollar commercial real estate deal riding on his ability to acquire that sector. He is the only one in this family trying to build a lasting legacy, and you are holding his capital hostage out of sheer spite. You are a disgrace to this family. 10 minutes later, my mother Patricia left her own voicemail. Her approach was different, utilizing the heavy, suffocating guilt she had perfected over 3 decades. Danielle, how could you do this to us? Patricia sobbed, her voice trembling with theatrical devastation. You are literally killing your father. His blood pressure is through the roof because of your stubbornness. Derek is a genius, Danielle. He has investors lining up for a huge development project, and he just needed that tiny piece of land to finalize the portfolio. Why do you always have to ruin everything for him? Why can you not just be a supportive sister for once in your life? Transfer the deed to Derek immediately, or do not ever bother calling us again. I sat back in my chair dissecting the new data their voicemails provided. They had just exposed the core of Derek's lie. He had told my parents he was the mastermind behind a massive commercial development deal. He wanted them to believe he was brokering a huge transaction, which meant he knew about the Titan Global project. He was likely trying to acquire my property so he could flip it to Titan Global himself, paying off his massive private equity debts and emerging as the hero of the family. They all thought I was sitting in my apartment, isolated and terrified by their coordinated attack. They believed the threat of eminent domain and the withdrawal of family love would force my hand. They did not know that Titan Global had already offered me $2 million, an offer I had rejected as insulting. They did not know about the $2 million classic car sitting in the bunker. And most importantly, they did not know that their threats of eminent domain and legal seizure were completely useless against the blind, irrevocable trust Mr. Caldwell had established for me on Friday. The trap was no longer just set. My family had actively climbed inside, locked the door behind them, and handed me the key. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and opened my laptop. It was time to shift from defense to offense. It was time to audit the attackers. I opened my primary auditing software, a highly specialized top-tier forensic accounting suite I had securely retained access to immediately after leaving my exhausting corporate job. I started my counter-investigation with Derek. His company, Vanguard Elite Real Estate, projected an image of absolute dominance on social media, filled with rented luxury cars and leased office spaces. I bypassed his glossy website and went straight into the raw data. I accessed the Texas Secretary of State commercial database, pulling the last 5 years of his corporate tax filings and cross-referencing them with municipal property records. Derek had told my parents he had a massive development deal lined up, heavily implying a direct partnership with Titan Global. But a forensic audit relies entirely on paper trails, not family gossip or arrogant boasting. I ran a complex Boolean search through the county preliminary permit applications, environmental impact study submissions, and corporate zoning requests for the past 18 months. I then cross-referenced those results with the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission EDGAR database, scanning Titan Global's publicly disclosed vendor and acquisition partner lists. Derek's name yielded absolutely zero results. He had no legal, financial, or contractual connection to Titan Global. His entire narrative was a complete fabrication. He was not a mastermind orchestrating a multi-billion-dollar tech campus. He was a desperate spectator trying to buy a winning lottery ticket after the numbers had already been drawn. If Derek was not generating any actual revenue from a Titan Global partnership, I needed to know exactly how he was funding his lavish lifestyle and his aggressive acquisition attempts. I initiated a deep dive into his corporate liabilities. Real estate developers run on leverage, but Derek was running on toxic fumes. I pulled the Uniform Commercial Code financing statements filed against Vanguard Elite. These public records detail personal property used as collateral for loans. The financial results loading on my primary monitor were absolutely staggering. Derek had not secured standard regulated bank loans. He had tapped into mezzanine financing, borrowing heavily from aggressive private equity firms that operated more like legalized loan sharks in custom-tailored suits. I traced the origins of 3 massive promissory notes. He was carrying exactly $10 million in short-term, high-yield debt. The interest rates were astronomical, bordering on predatory lending thresholds. Worse, the principal balances were reaching maturity and coming due in less than 30 days. I looked closer at the collateralization clauses. Derek had cross-collateralized everything. He had put up his company assets, his leased vehicles, and to my absolute horror, a secondary lien on my parents' primary residence. That explained his sheer, unadulterated panic. If Derek did not secure a massive influx of cash immediately, these private equity firms would trigger default clauses liquidating his company and seizing my parents' home. He was backed into a corner, and my gas station was the only asset he thought he could steal to save himself. But $10 million of institutional debt requires a highly sophisticated financial cover-up to prevent early default triggers and maintain the illusion of solvency. Derek was simply not smart enough to hide that level of insolvency on his own. He needed elite legal help. I shifted my focus to Kendra. She was a senior partner at a prestigious corporate law firm, giving her unrestricted access to elite financial architecture. I began tracing the wire transfers Derek used to make his minimum monthly interest payments to the private equity firms. The money was not coming from Vanguard elite operating accounts. It was flowing backward from a series of obscure limited liability companies registered in Delaware and Wyoming. These states are notorious for corporate anonymity shielding the true owners from public record. But forensic accounting is about finding the weak link in the chain. I ran the employer identification numbers of those shell companies through a specialized legal database tracking commercial registered agents. While the ownership was hidden, the registered agent for every single LLC was the exact same junior paralegal working directly under Kendra at her law firm. Furthermore, the annual franchise tax fees for these anonymous shell companies were paid using a corporate credit card directly issued to Kendra's legal practice. She was actively using her professional resources and subordinates to construct a financial labyrinth for her husband. I dug deeper into the bank routing numbers associated with the shell companies, employing a recursive tracking algorithm to map the flow of capital. I uncovered rapid complex transactions designed to obscure the origin of the funds. Kendra was illegally commingling client retainer funds from her law firm escrow accounts with Derek's personal debt obligations. She was floating the stolen money just long enough to make his interest payments and then replacing it using new loans pulled from different shell companies. It was a classic Ponzi scheme structure, and it was a massive federal crime. As a corporate attorney, Kendra had sworn an oath to uphold the law, yet she was actively committing wire fraud, money laundering, and breaching her fiduciary duties to hide her husband's impending bankruptcy. I spent the next 6 hours meticulously downloading bank statements, wire transfer receipts, and registered agent filings. I organized the data into a chronologically indexed, heavily encrypted digital dossier. Every claim I formulated was backed by irrefutable documentation. I had the exact routing numbers, the timestamps, the digital signatures, and the IP addresses of the transactions. They had threatened to use the law and their political connections to crush me. They believed they were untouchable predators targeting an ignorant victim, but they had completely failed to realize that the law is just a mathematical equation governed by evidence. They had left a massive, glowing trail of numbers across the internet. I was the auditor who had just calculated the exact formula for their absolute destruction. My dossier was the bulletproof weapon that would inevitably end their careers, sever their financial lifelines, and expose their profound hypocrisy to the entire world. Across town, inside the suffocatingly immaculate living room of my parents' house, the atmosphere was entirely devoid of the surgical precision I was utilizing in my apartment. Derek was pacing the Persian rug. His tie loosened his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. The private equity loan sharks had called him 3 times that morning. They did not leave voicemails. They simply called to let the phone ring, a psychological tactic designed to remind a debtor that their absolute financial ruin was approaching. Sitting on the floral sofa, my mother Patricia was nervously twisting her diamond wedding band while my father Richard stared grimly at a blank television screen. Kendra sat at the mahogany coffee table, her posture rigidly perfect, but her eyes betrayed the severe strain of keeping her husband out of federal prison. She unclasped her designer briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of heavy bond paper. She placed it perfectly in the center of the table, flanked by a gold-plated fountain pen and her official state notary stamp. "This is the only way out," Kendra said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "The City Council eminent domain strategy will take at least 6 months to wind through the municipal courts. You do not have 6 months. You have maybe 6 days before those mezzanine lenders trigger the cross-collateralization clauses and take your parents' house." My father finally turned away from the television, his face drawn and exhausted. "What exactly is that piece of paper, Kendra?" "It is a general power of attorney," Kendra explained, tapping the document with a manicured fingernail. "It officially grants Derek the absolute legal authority to execute real estate transactions on behalf of Danielle. Once this is signed and notarized, Derek can legally transfer the deed of the gas station to Vanguard Elite. He can then immediately leverage the property to secure a bridge loan from a legitimate bank, pay off the private equity debt, and save this family." Patricia stopped twisting her ring. Her eyes widened with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. But Danielle refused to sign anything. "How does this help us if she refuses to participate?" Derek stopped pacing and walked over to the coffee table. He looked down at his mother, his expression twisting into a mask of ugly, self-righteous entitlement. "She does not have to participate. She is having a mental breakdown. She quit her job. She threw her money away on a toxic waste dump. She is clearly not in her right mind. We are just doing what has to be done to protect the family assets." "You mean forge her signature," Richard stated flatly. The word hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Kendra leaned back, crossing her legs, her face completely devoid of ethical conflict. "I mean executing a necessary legal maneuver to save an incompetent family member from her own catastrophic financial decisions. I have drafted the document. I am a licensed notary public. I am legally authorized to verify signatures. If one of you signs her name, I will stamp it. Once my seal is on this paper, it becomes an irrefutable legal instrument. The county clerk will process it without a second glance because it comes directly from a senior partner at a major law firm." The sheer arrogance of her assumption was staggering. Kendra actually believed that her status as an African-American corporate powerhouse rendered her immune to the consequences of blatant forgery. She was so accustomed to intimidating opposing counsel that she assumed I would simply roll over and accept the theft of my property. She believed I was too poor, too uneducated in the law, and too emotionally broken to fight back. She failed to recognize that an auditor operates entirely on verified facts, not emotional intimidation. "But forgery is a felony," Patricia whispered, her hands trembling. "If she finds out, she could go to the police." "Let her go to the police!" Derek scoffed, picking up the gold pen. "What is she going to do? Hire a public defender to fight my corporate lawyers? She does not have the capital to mount a civil lawsuit, and the police will view it as a messy family dispute. By the time anyone takes her seriously, the land will already be leveraged, the debts will be paid, and we will be untouchable. I am doing this for us. We cannot lose everything because Danielle refuses to be a team player." Derek handed the pen to my mother. Patricia hesitated for only a fraction of a second before taking it. She had spent her entire life enabling Derek, sacrificing me to maintain the illusion of his perfection. She looked down at the signature line. She knew my handwriting perfectly. She had signed my name on hundreds of school permission slips and doctor notes when I was a child. She took a deep breath, pressed the gold nib to the paper, and flawlessly forged my signature. Kendra immediately slid the paper toward herself. She picked up her heavy brass notary stamp, aligned it perfectly over the signature, and pressed down. The mechanical click of the stamp echoing in the quiet living room was the sound of 4 people simultaneously committing a severe federal crime. Back in my apartment, I was pouring myself a glass of ice water when my laptop emitted a sharp, high-pitched chime. It was a custom notification alert I had set up weeks ago through the county clerk digital recording system. Any document filed referencing my name or the legal parcel number of the gas station would instantly trigger an automated email to my secure server. I set the glass down and walked over to my desk. I opened the email from the county clerk. Attached was a freshly scanned PDF document that had been electronically submitted just moments prior. I clicked the attachment, and the image expanded across my high-definition monitor. It was a general power of attorney granting Derek full control over my assets. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page. There, in perfectly executed cursive, was my forged signature. Right next to it was the dark, undeniable ink of Kendra's official notary seal, complete with her state commission number and expiration date. A cold, genuine smile spread across my face. I had anticipated they would try something desperate, but I never imagined they would be arrogant enough to hand me a signed confession of federal wire fraud and forgery. They actually believed they had outsmarted me. They thought they had just secured the gas station and saved their crumbling empire from the private equity loan sharks. They were completely unaware that the property was no longer registered in my name. It was securely locked inside the irrevocable trust at Apex Financial. The document they had just risked their freedom to forge was legally worthless, but the severe felony they committed to create it was absolutely real. They had just armed the bomb, and I was holding the detonator. I downloaded the forged PDF, added it to my heavily encrypted dossier, and immediately sent a secure message to Mr. Caldwell at Apex Financial. It was time to invite Titan Global back to the table. I walked into the gleaming glass lobby of Apex Financial exactly 45 minutes after receiving the forged power of attorney from the county clerk automated system. The receptionist recognized me immediately and escorted me directly to the private elevators. When the polished steel doors opened on the penthouse level, Mr. Caldwell was already waiting for me at the entrance of his soundproof conference room. He was wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his expression a mixture of professional curiosity and sharp, predatory anticipation. "Please have a seat," Danielle Caldwell said, gesturing toward the long mahogany table. "I received your secure message. You mentioned there has been an unauthorized filing regarding the Route 9 property." I sat down, opened my high-performance laptop, and rotated the screen so he could see it. I did not bother with small talk. I pulled up the high-resolution PDF of the forged power of attorney. 30 minutes ago, this document was electronically filed with the county clerk, I explained, keeping my voice completely devoid of emotion. As you can see, it purports to grant my brother Derek full general power of attorney over all my financial and real estate assets. The signature at the bottom is a forgery executed by my mother. Caldwell leaned forward, resting his hands on the table as his sharp eyes scanned the document. He zeroed in on the bottom corner of the page. "And that is a registered state notary seal." He observed, his voice dropping an octave as he recognized the severity of the situation. "Yes," I replied. "That is the official seal of Kendra, my sister-in-law. She is a senior partner at a major corporate law firm in the city. She notarized a forged signature to facilitate the theft of a commercial asset she believes is worth roughly $200,000. She is completely unaware of the Titan Global zoning situation, and more importantly, she is unaware of the structural changes we made to the property deed last week." Caldwell sat back in his heavy leather chair and let out a low, humorless chuckle. It was the sound of a legal shark smelling blood in the water. "Danielle," he said, interlacing his fingers, "the level of sheer, unadulterated arrogance required to file this is almost incomprehensible. Your sister-in-law just immolated her entire legal career on public record. But let us review exactly why this document is legally equivalent to toilet paper." I nodded, ready to confirm my own auditing theories against his elite legal expertise. "When you came to me last week," Caldwell continued, utilizing his precise courtroom cadence, "we drafted and executed a blind, irrevocable trust. We officially transferred the deed of the gas station from your personal name into the trust. By definition, an irrevocable trust cannot be modified, amended, or terminated without the permission of the grantor's named beneficiary, which is heavily shielded. You willingly surrendered direct personal ownership of that asset in exchange for absolute legal protection. So, from a technical standpoint, I no longer own the gas station, I stated, confirming the mechanics. The trust owns it. Exactly. Caldwell smiled. You are merely the beneficiary. Therefore, even if this power of attorney were entirely legitimate, even if you had willingly signed it in blood in front of a dozen witnesses, it would still be completely useless. Derek cannot use a personal power of attorney to sell or leverage an asset that you do not personally own. The property belongs to a distinct legal entity. He might as well try to sell the Brooklyn Bridge. I tapped the trackpad, zooming in on Kendra's notary stamp. And what about the criminal liability? I asked. I want to know exactly what statutes they have triggered. Caldwell leaned forward again, his eyes gleaming with professional ruthlessness. They have triggered a catastrophic avalanche of federal and state felonies. First, we have basic forgery and fraud. Your mother committed the physical forgery, but Derek and Kendra conspired to execute it. Because they filed it electronically across county lines using internet servers, it immediately escalates to federal wire fraud. That carries a potential sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. I committed those numbers to memory, and Kendra, I prompted. Kendra is facing the absolute destruction of her life, Caldwell stated plainly. She is a licensed officer of the court. By intentionally affixing her notary seal to a forged document, she committed notary fraud, perjury, and subornation of perjury. When the State Bar Association sees this, she will not just be disbarred. She will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Her law firm will terminate her immediately to protect their own liability, and she will likely face a minimum of 5 to 10 years behind bars. They tried to steal a property, but instead they handed you a loaded gun. He reached across the table and tapped the edge of my laptop screen. The standard procedure here is to immediately contact the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the State Attorney General. We file an injunction, freeze Derek's accounts, and have them arrested by the end of the day. Give me the word and I will make the calls. I looked at the forged signature on the screen. I thought about the decades of emotional abuse, the constant belittling, and the sheer entitlement that led my family to believe they could casually steal from me. Arresting them today would stop the transaction, but it would not expose the true depths of their desperation. I wanted Titan Global involved. I wanted the private equity loan sharks to close in. I wanted Derek to stand on a stage and publicly claim a victory right before the floor collapsed beneath him. No, I said softly. We do not call the authorities yet. Caldwell paused, raising an eyebrow. You want to let a federal crime sit on the public record? I want them to use it, I corrected him. Derek is in $10 million of debt to mezzanine lenders. He is desperate to leverage this gas station to save his fake real estate empire. If we stop him now, he just goes to jail for forgery. But if we let him attempt to use this document to secure funding, or worse, if we let him present it to Titan Global as proof of ownership, the fallout will be public, financial, and utterly irreversible. He will defraud his own investors. Caldwell stared at me for a long moment. I could see the profound respect settling into his features. You are a very dangerous woman, Danielle, he murmured. You are going to let them build their entire rescue plan on a foundation of quicksand. I am an auditor, I replied, closing the laptop with a decisive snap. I do not just catch discrepancies. I track them to the source to ensure the entire corrupt system is dismantled. Derek and Kendra are going to throw a massive celebration the moment they think this deal is secured. I want them to feel invincible. I want them to pop champagne. And then Caldwell asked. And then I said, standing up from the mahogany table, we schedule a meeting with the CEO of Titan Global. It is time to negotiate the real sale right over their heads. I did not waste another minute dealing with Bradley or his aggressive corporate cronies in the land acquisition department. They were merely foot soldiers executing a flawed strategy. I needed to speak to the architect of the $4 billion Silicon Valley of the South project, the chief executive officer of Titan Global, Elias Thorne. Elias was a notoriously elusive billionaire surrounded by layers of private security and public relations handlers. However, executives at his level operate on highly predictable data-driven schedules. I utilized my forensic access to public aviation databases and flight manifests to track the tail number of the Titan Global corporate jet. It had landed at Austin Bergstrom International Airport at 4 in the afternoon. I then cross-referenced high-end corporate dining expenses typical for his advanced logistics team and executive protection detail. Within 2 hours, my algorithm pinpointed his exact location. He was dining in the private, glass-enclosed wine room at the Capitol Grill in downtown Austin. I arrived at the restaurant wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal suit I had purchased specifically for this exact moment. I bypassed the hostess stand, entirely projecting an aura of absolute belonging. I walked straight past the main dining floor and approached the private wine room. Two massive security details in dark suits stood by the sliding glass doors. I did not break my stride. I looked the lead guard directly in the eye and stated that I was the primary beneficiary of the Route 9 Irrevocable Trust, the sole entity holding the commercial access corridor to the Titan project. I told him Elias had exactly 3 minutes to let me in before I sold the land to a competing data center conglomerate. The guard touched his earpiece, listened intently, and stepped aside, sliding the heavy glass door open. Elias Thorne was sitting alone at the head of a massive mahogany table, a half-empty glass of scotch resting next to his tablet. He was in his late 50s, possessing the sharp, predatory gaze of a man accustomed to crushing his competition. He did not offer me a seat. I pulled out a heavy leather chair opposite him and sat down anyway. I placed my leather portfolio squarely in the center of the table. "You have exactly 2 minutes to explain how you bypassed my security and why I should not have you arrested for trespassing," Elias said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of a severe threat. I unrolled the 1974 county zoning blueprints on the table, pinning the corners down with the salt and pepper shakers. "You are losing approximately $4.2 million a week in operational delays, Elias. Your land acquisition team is incompetent. They purchased 500 acres of prime real estate without securing a legally viable access road for heavy construction machinery. I am the sole owner of that road. My name is Danielle, and I am the beneficiary of the trust your agent Bradley insulted yesterday with a pathetic $2 million offer." Elias leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked from me to the yellowed blueprints. "You are the gas station owner, the woman holding out. I am the auditor who is about to save your entire $4 billion project from collapsing under the weight of municipal gridlock," I corrected him. I pulled a sleek tablet from my portfolio and slid it across the table, illuminating a highly detailed spreadsheet. "I did not come here to ask you for a handout. I came here to present an audit of your own flawed logistics plan." Elias looked down at the tablet. "What is this?" "This is your internal construction timeline," I explained, keeping my tone perfectly measured and clinical. "Your engineers budgeted $70 million for infrastructure development in the first quarter. But because you are geographically landlocked by protected wetlands on 3 sides, your alternative access proposal relies on petitioning the state for a temporary environmental variance. I ran the numbers on your variance strategy. Historically, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality rejects those petitions 92% of the time when a commercially zoned alternative exists. The appeals process alone will stall your groundbreaking ceremony for a minimum of 18 months. 18 months of delay, compounded by current inflation rates on raw construction materials, will balloon your initial budget by nearly $400 million. Elias stared at the spreadsheet, his jaw tightening. He was a man of numbers, and he recognized immediately that my calculations were flawlessly executed. "My legal team assured me we could force an emergency easement through your property via eminent domain," he countered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Your legal team is lying to you to justify their retainer fees," I replied instantly. "My property is held within a blind, irrevocable trust. Any eminent domain petition will trigger an automatic federal injunction, dragging Titan Global into a highly publicized multi-year legal battle. Investors despise uncertainty, Elias. The moment the media reports that your flagship project is indefinitely stalled by a single zoning dispute, your stock valuation will plummet. You will lose billions in market capitalization before you ever pour a single ounce of concrete." He picked up his glass of scotch, took a slow sip, and studied me with a new, profound level of respect. Bradley offered you $2 million. You rejected it. What exactly is your valuation of that miserable strip of asphalt? I reached across the table and tapped the original 1974 blueprint. I am not selling you the land, Elias. I am selling you the key to your empire. The land remains in my trust. You are going to lease the subterranean and surface rights to that commercial corridor for a period of 99 years. A 99-year lease, Elias asked, raising an eyebrow. That is highly unorthodox for this type of corporate acquisition. You are dealing with a highly unorthodox logistical failure, I shot back without missing a beat. My terms are non-negotiable. If we do not reach an agreement tonight, I will permanently seal the corridor and initiate the development of a private high-security data storage facility on my site. The moment I break ground, your alternative access evaporates entirely. Your 500 acres become nothing more than a highly expensive, completely inaccessible nature preserve. Elias set his glass down. The silence in the private wine room was absolute. I had completely stripped away his corporate leverage, his legal threats, and his intimidation tactics. I had reduced the entire situation to pure, undeniable mathematics. He was staring at an auditor who had just outmaneuvered his entire executive board on their flagship development. I had cornered him with irrefutable facts, and in the world of high finance, facts dictate the flow of capital. You have my undivided attention, Daniel, Elias finally said, a sharp, genuine smile breaking across his face. Tell me exactly what numbers you have in mind to execute this lease and save my project from total disaster. I want $18 million wired directly into my irrevocable trust by the close of business today. I stated, my voice completely steady. That covers the 99-year lease of the surface and subterranean rights for the commercial access corridor. Titan Global will handle all paving infrastructure maintenance, environmental compliance, and municipal permitting at your own expense. I retain absolute title ownership of the land. Furthermore, in addition to the upfront capital, I require a 2% equity stake in the gross annual revenue generated by the tech park once it becomes operational. Elias leaned back in his chair, exhaling a slow, measured breath. He folded his hands together on the table. 18 million is a rounding error for my acquisition department, he admitted plainly. But 2% gross equity on a $4 billion development is completely unprecedented for a simple access lease. You are asking for generational wealth, Danielle. You are asking for a permanent seat at the table. I am offering you the absolute survival of your flagship campus, I replied, not breaking eye contact. If you reject the equity stake, the upfront lease cost immediately becomes $50 million. I know your quarterly earnings report is due in exactly 14 days. If you do not have a finalized land acquisition plan by then, your institutional investors will begin a massive sell-off. Choose your preferred liability, Elias. You can pay me a fraction of your future success, or you can watch your current valuation collapse. Elias stared at me in total silence, calculating the terrifying accuracy of my assessment. He knew I was entirely serious, and he knew I possessed the exact data required to ruin his timeline. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, and placed it on speaker on the mahogany table. Get the general counsel on the line immediately, Elias ordered his assistant, his tone reflecting a newfound urgency. We are drafting a 99-year commercial lease and a gross equity partnership agreement right now. Clear my schedule for the rest of the night. For the next 2 hours, the private wine room transformed into a high-stakes legal war room. Elias had his top corporate attorneys join via a secure video conference displayed on his tablet. I sat across from the billionaire, my own screen glowing as I audited every single clause his lawyers attempted to insert. They tried to sneak in a right of first refusal clause, hoping to secure the option to buy the land if I ever decided to sell. I struck it out immediately. They attempted to cap the 2% equity at a 10-year maturity date, arguing that it was standard corporate practice. I vetoed the limitation, forcing them to make the equity perpetual for the entire duration of the 99-year lease. I did not yield a single inch of ground. I utilized the exact same aggressive legal terminology Kendra had tried to weaponize against me in my apartment, but I applied it with surgical precision, backed by absolute, undeniable leverage. Before we finalize the digital signatures, I have one final non-negotiable stipulation, I said, sliding a separate document across the table. It was a fiercely restrictive non-disclosure agreement drafted by Mr. Caldwell at Apex Financial. My identity as the trust beneficiary, the financial specifics of this transaction, and the very existence of this meeting must remain absolutely confidential. If Titan Global, your legal team, or any of your subsidiaries leaks my involvement to the public or to any third party, the lease is instantly nullified and you forfeit the $18 million as a punitive penalty. Elias read through the strict parameters of the NDA, a look of genuine amusement crossing his face. "You are hiding this from someone specific," he noted, his sharp eyes studying my face. "You are sitting on a multi-million-dollar empire and you want to remain a total ghost. Most people would be calling the newspapers to brag. I am mitigating my personal liability." I corrected him, keeping my expression perfectly blank. "Sign the agreement, Elias." He signed the NDA with a heavy gold pen, the ink permanently sealing my secret. The Titan Global legal team finalized the lease and equity contracts, digitally routing them to our respective devices. We executed the documents electronically, our digital signatures legally binding the multi-billion-dollar tech corporation to my exact terms. The trap was now fully funded and legally fortified. "The lease is contingent on the immediate transfer of funds," I reminded him, closing my leather portfolio. "I want the $18 million wired to the Apex Financial routing number provided in Section 4 of the contract." Elias nodded to the screen. "I have already authorized the release from our primary corporate acquisition fund. Our banking algorithms process high-tier commercial transfers instantaneously. The capital should clear your institution in less than 60 seconds." I picked up my phone and logged into the highly encrypted banking portal Mr. Caldwell had established for the irrevocable trust. The screen loaded, displaying the familiar minimalist interface. I bypassed the standard checking module and navigated directly to the primary holding account. The previous balance had been a flat zero. I pressed the refresh icon. The screen buffered for a fraction of a second before the new balance appeared in crisp black digital font. $18 million. I did not gasp. I did not smile. My heart rate did not elevate a single beat. I stared at the massive 8-figure sum with the exact same clinical detachment I used when balancing a corporate spreadsheet. It was just a number on a screen. But unlike Derek's fake Rolex, or Kendra's maxed-out credit cards, or the suffocating financial anxiety my parents constantly projected onto me, this number was absolutely real. It was a highly efficient tool I had extracted from an inefficient corporation. More importantly, it was the absolute guarantee of my permanent freedom from my toxic family. "The funds have been verified," I said, locking the screen and sliding the phone back into my pocket. "You have your access road, Elias. Your bulldozers and engineers can cross my property lines starting at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning." Elias stood up from the table, offering his hand. "You are the most terrifyingly competent person I have done business with in a decade, Danielle. If you ever get bored of forensic auditing, Titan Global has a permanent seat on the executive board waiting for you." I stood up and shook his hand firmly. "I am officially retired, Elias. Have a pleasant evening." I walked out of the private wine room, past the imposing security detail, and out into the warm Austin night. Nobody passing me on the busy downtown sidewalk had any idea that the quiet woman in the charcoal suit had just executed an $18 million transaction over a glass of sparkling water. And my family had absolutely no idea that their desperate forged power of attorney was now officially competing against a legally binding contract signed by a tech billionaire. Derek was likely sitting in his house right now, convincing my parents that he had finally secured the gas station and saved them all from the private equity loan sharks. He was probably planning the exact moment he would unveil his stolen prize to his investors to secure his bridge loan. I walked to my car, feeling a profound, icy calm settle over me. Let Derek throw his extravagant party. Let Kendra bask in the arrogance of her forged victory. They were preparing to celebrate on a stage that I now completely owned, and I was going to let them perform their entire routine right before I pulled the curtains down permanently. Exactly 3 days later, the grand ballroom of the Whispering Pines Country Club was transformed into a monument of financial delusion. Derek had liquidated the absolute last drop of his available corporate credit to rent the most exclusive venue in Austin. I stood completely unnoticed in the shadows of the second-floor mezzanine balcony looking down at the black-tie investor gala unfolding below. The room was dripping with manufactured opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 50 circular tables draped in heavy white linen. Waiters in pristine tuxedos circulated through the dense crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with $100 bottles of vintage champagne and imported caviar. A live string quartet played softly in the corner, entirely drowned out by the loud, arrogant laughter of the local elite. Every single detail of this party was a calculated lie. Derek was bleeding cash he did not possess to project an image of infinite wealth. He was hosting this gala to announce his official acquisition of the Route 9 access corridor, a property he firmly believed he had stolen from me using the forged power of attorney. His ultimate goal tonight was highly specific and entirely predatory. He needed to scam the wealthy individuals in this room out of millions in new investment capital. As an auditor, I could read the desperate mathematics hidden beneath the expensive floral arrangements. Derek was drowning under $10 million of high-yield private equity debt. Those loan sharks were ready to seize his company and foreclose on our parents' house by Monday morning. This gala was his final desperate roll of the dice. He had printed glossy, high-resolution prospectuses displaying the Titan Global Tech Park, falsely claiming Vanguard Elite Real Estate was the exclusive access partner. He was asking the local millionaires for a minimum buy-in of $500,000 each. If he could convince 20 naive investors to write checks tonight, he could pay off his toxic debt, bury the evidence of his failing company, and emerge as a legitimate player in the commercial real estate market. I recognized three men standing rigidly by the private bar. They were not local Austin elite. They wore dark, unstructured suits and carried themselves with the cold, predatory stillness of mezzanine lenders. These were the private equity sharks who held the $10 million notes on Derek's life. Derek had invited them specifically to witness this spectacle. He needed them to see the wealthy marks lining up to sign contracts. It was a high-wire act. If the lenders saw weakness, they would initiate foreclosure immediately. If they saw a feeding frenzy of new investors, they would grant him a 30-day extension to clear the checks. My eyes tracked across the crowded ballroom and locked onto Kendra. She was gliding effortlessly across the polished marble floor, holding a crystal flute of champagne. She was wearing a brand-new custom-tailored emerald green silk gown that easily cost upward of $10,000. The fabric shimmered under the chandeliers, a physical manifestation of stolen money. She looked absolutely radiant, entirely unbothered by the fact that she had recently committed notary fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. In her mind, she was invincible. I watched her approach a group of older, wealthy investors. She threw her head back in laughter at a joke one of them made, placing her manicured hand on the arm of a prominent local surgeon. She was actively selling the lie, using her prestigious legal credentials to legitimize her husband's fraudulent enterprise. Kendra caught the eye of one of the mezzanine lenders at the bar and raised her champagne glass in a silent, arrogant toast. The sheer, unadulterated hubris of that gesture was staggering. She was a corporate lawyer actively mocking the very people who possessed the legal right to destroy her husband, completely trusting her forged document as an impenetrable shield. A few yards away, holding court near a massive ice sculpture carved into the shape of the Vanguard Elite Company logo, were my parents. Patricia and Richard were completely in their element, basking in the reflected glory of their golden child. My father was wearing a rented tuxedo, puffing his chest out as he spoke to a local city councilman. My mother was adorned in her heavy diamond necklace, her face flushed with the thrill of high society validation. I adjusted the parabolic directional microphone I had brought with me, pointing it down toward their conversation. The audio fed directly into my earpiece, crystal clear. Oh, you know Derek, my father boomed, swirling his bourbon. He has always had a visionary mind. While other developers were fighting over scraps downtown, my son engineered this massive deal right under the nose of a $4 billion tech conglomerate. He secured the only access road into the valley. Titan Global has to go through him now. It takes a special kind of genius to spot an opportunity like that. Patricia chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. We always knew he was destined for greatness. He practically carries this family on his shoulders. The councilman nodded, clearly impressed. I heard your daughter was initially involved with the property. Is she joining the Vanguard elite firm? Patricia let out a heavy, dramatic sigh, placing a hand over her heart. Oh, poor Danielle. She simply could not handle the pressure of commercial real estate. She had a bit of a breakdown recently, completely mismanaged her finances, and bought that awful gas station on a whim. Thankfully, Derek stepped in to save her from bankruptcy. He took the property off her hands and turned her terrible mistake into this magnificent venture. We are just so relieved he was there to clean up her mess. I listened to my mother rewrite history, completely erasing my competence to elevate her son. They genuinely believed I was sitting in my apartment, weeping over my financial ruin, completely oblivious to the fact that they had forged my signature. They felt absolutely no remorse. Finally, my gaze shifted to the center of the room. Derek was standing near the main stage, straightening his silk bow tie. He looked like a man who had just conquered the world. He was holding a stack of the fraudulent investment contracts, flanked by two junior associates from his firm, who looked at him with blind admiration. He was shaking hands, flashing his bright veneered smile and exuding a thick, suffocating aura of arrogance. He tapped the microphone on the podium. He was about to ask these people to hand over their fortunes based on a deed he did not own and a power of attorney that was entirely void. The house of cards was stacked miles high, defying gravity, on nothing but pure ego. He cleared his throat, the sharp screech of audio feedback echoing through the ballroom, signaling the beginning of his grand deception. I adjusted the cuffs of my custom suit, feeling the heavy weight of the $18 million lease contract resting in my breast pocket. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the balcony, watching him step up to the podium. The time for silent observation was officially over. I turned away from the mezzanine railing and walked down the sweeping carpeted staircase toward the main foyer of the country club. Waiting for me by the massive oak double doors were three men. Elias Thorne stood in the center, wearing a sharp midnight blue tuxedo, radiating the effortless power of a tech billionaire. Flanking him were two men in perfectly unmemorable dark gray suits. They carried no visible weapons, but their posture, their vigilant eyes, and the subtle bulges beneath their suit jackets immediately identified them as federal agents. I approached them, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. I was no longer the exhausted woman in a cheap cardigan sitting at a Formica kitchen table. I was wearing a custom-tailored black Tom Ford suit cut with absolute precision, paired with a crisp white silk blouse. My hair was pulled back into a severe polished knot. I looked exactly like what I was, a multi-million-dollar corporate stakeholder about to execute a hostile takeover. Are we ready? Elias asked quietly, a shark-like grin touching the corners of his mouth. I nodded, reaching out to grasp the brass handle of the right door. Let us go audit, my brother. We pushed the heavy oak doors open simultaneously. The timing was flawless. Inside the ballroom, Derek had just cleared his throat and leaned into the microphone to welcome his wealthy marks. The loud groan of the heavy doors echoing through the cavernous space immediately drew the attention of the crowd. 500 pairs of eyes shifted from the stage to the entrance. The string quartet faltered for a second, a single discordant note scraping through the air before they recovered. I stepped into the golden light of the chandeliers flanked by the billionaire and the federal agents. The sheer visual impact of our group entering the room sent an immediate ripple of confusion and intense curiosity through the crowd of local elite. My parents were standing near the ice sculpture, less than 30 feet from the entrance. My mother, Patricia, dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the marble floor, a sharp crash that cut through the low murmur of the room. My father Richard turned completely pale, his jaw dropping as he took in my tailored suit and the imposing men standing beside me. Panic instantly overrode his shock. He grabbed my mother by the elbow, and the two of them power walked toward me, their faces twisted with a mixture of rage and sheer terror. They positioned themselves directly in my path, attempting to form a human barricade before I could step fully onto the main ballroom floor. "Danielle, what in the world are you doing here?" my father hissed, keeping his voice to a vicious, strained whisper so the surrounding investors would not hear. "You were not invited. You are going to ruin your brother's night. Turn around and walk right back out that door before I call security and have you dragged out in handcuffs." My mother stepped closer, her eyes darting nervously toward the wealthy guests watching us. "Have you completely lost your mind?" she whispered frantically, grabbing my forearm with her manicured claws. "Look at you dressing up in some fake designer suit to come here and cause a scene. Derek is conducting high-level business. He is saving this family. You are nothing but an ungrateful, jealous little girl trying to steal his spotlight. Leave right now, or I swear you will never hear from us again." I looked down at her hand gripping my sleeve. I did not pull away. I simply stared at her fingers with a look of absolute freezing disgust until she slowly released her grip, unnerved by my complete lack of emotional reaction. "Do not ever touch me again," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, yet carrying a lethal authority that made both of them physically recoil. "I am not here to steal his spotlight. I am here to repossess my property." My father stepped forward, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, a tactic he had relied on for 33 years. "You have no property, Danielle," he growled, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. "Derek owns it. The paperwork is filed. It is over. Now get out of this building before you embarrass yourself in front of the most powerful people in Austin." I tilted my head, offering him a smile entirely devoid of warmth. "You mean the paperwork you and Derek forged?" I asked quietly. "The general power of attorney you had mother sign in your living room, which Kendra illegally notarized." My parents froze. The blood completely drained from Patricia's face, leaving her looking hollow and terrified. Richard opened his mouth, but his vocal cords seemed to have paralyzed. They were entirely unequipped to handle a situation where their lies were thrown back in their faces with such clinical precision. Furthermore, I continued deliberately stepping closer to my father, forcing him to yield his ground. I would be very careful about threatening to call security. "The two gentlemen standing behind me are special agents with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They are here specifically to observe a suspected wire fraud in progress. If you obstruct my path for one more second, I will have them arrest you both as accomplices before the appetizers are even served. Now step aside." My parents practically stumbled over each other to get out of my way. They were completely paralyzed by the terrifyingly calm demeanor of a daughter they no longer recognized. They watched in muted horror as I walked past them, my heels clicking rhythmically against the floor. I continued my march across the ballroom, parting the sea of wealthy investors. Elias Thorne walked at my right shoulder, projecting an aura of untouchable corporate dominance, while the federal agents secured our flank. Up on the stage, Derek had completely frozen. His hand was still gripping the edges of the podium, his knuckles turning white. He was staring at me, his eyes wide and panicked, like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. He tried to speak into the microphone, but all that came out was a pathetic, dry stutter. Down on the floor, Kendra was standing near the front row of tables. Her emerald green dress suddenly looked less like a victory gown and more like a target. I saw the exact moment her arrogant smile collapsed. She recognized Elias Thorne immediately. Any senior corporate attorney worth their billing rate knew the face of the Titan Global Chief Executive Officer. Her eyes darted from Elias to me to the federal agents and finally up to her husband on the stage. The terrifying reality of the situation was rapidly processing in her legally trained mind, but it was already too late for her to run. I bypassed the general seating and walked directly to the reserved VIP table situated dead center exactly 10 feet from the front of Derek's stage. The table was currently occupied by the three private equity mezzanine lenders, the men who held the $10 million guillotine over my brother's neck. I did not ask for permission. I pulled out a chair directly facing the podium and sat down. Elias took the seat to my right. When I sat at the VIP table, the three financial predators looked at me, then at the tech billionaire beside me. They instantly recognized that the apex predator had just entered the room. One of the lenders leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms silently, watching the dynamic shift. He knew Derek was in trouble, but he was about to witness a financial massacre. I crossed my legs, folded my hands on the pristine white tablecloth, and looked up at Derek. He was sweating profusely now, the bright stage lights illuminating the sheer terror melting his arrogant facade. He was holding the fraudulent investment contracts, preparing to ask for millions. I gave him a slow, deliberate nod, inviting him to continue his speech. The audience was waiting. It was time for my brother to perform. Derek tapped the microphone, the sharp feedback silencing the entire ballroom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice echoing with practiced charisma and false confidence. "Welcome to the future of Austin commercial real estate. Tonight, Vanguard Elite is officially announcing the exclusive acquisition of the Route 9 Access Corridor, the only gateway to the new $4 billion Titan Global Tech campus." He held up the forged power of attorney, waving the heavy bond paper in the air like a winning lottery ticket. "We hold the keys to the valley. But Vanguard Elite is built on community and shared vision. We are offering a limited number of elite partners the opportunity to join this historic venture today. The minimum buy-in is $500,000, and our internal projections indicate a staggering 400% return on investment within 36 months. Polite applause rippled through the wealthy crowd. I saw several older investors reaching for the sleek silver pens resting beside their leather-bound contract binders. The three private equity lenders sitting at my VIP table leaned forward, their eyes tracking the movement of those pens with predatory anticipation. I stood up. I did not rush. I walked smoothly around the VIP table and approached the short carpeted staircase leading up to the main stage. Elias Thorne remained seated, watching the spectacle with quiet amusement, while the two federal agents seamlessly mirrored my movement, taking up positions directly at the base of the stairs. Derek saw me ascending the steps out of the corner of his eye. His charismatic smile faltered instantly, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He covered the microphone with his hand. "Get off this stage right now," he hissed, his voice trembling with rage and fear. "Security is on the way. You are destroying my life. Get out of here before I have you arrested." I ignored him entirely. I walked straight past the wooden podium and approached the audio-visual cart, positioned near the massive 20-foot projector screen. Derek had his sleek silver laptop connected to the main feed, displaying a glossy fake rendering of his company logo, hovering majestically over the Titan Global campus. I reached down, firmly grasped the high-definition video cable, and yanked it out of his computer port. The massive screen behind him instantly went black, eliciting a collective gasp of confusion from the 500 guests in the ballroom. I pulled my encrypted tablet from my leather portfolio, connected the video cable to my own device, and tapped the screen to mirror my display. The 20-foot projector roared back to life. Instead of a glossy marketing rendering, the screen was now dominated by a stark, heavily detailed spreadsheet. At the very top, in glaring red letters, was the title Vanguard Elite Real Estate Comprehensive Forensic Financial Audit. I turned back to Derek, reached out, and pulled the microphone smoothly from his sweating, trembling hand. He was too paralyzed by the suddenness of my actions to resist. "Good evening," I said, my voice projecting crystal clear across the silent, utterly confused ballroom. "My name is Danielle. I am a former corporate financial auditor, and I am the actual owner of the Route 9 property my brother just attempted to sell you." A wave of shocked murmurs swept through the room. Down on the floor, my parents looked like they were going to faint. Kendra was furiously typing on her phone, likely trying to secure a criminal defense attorney. "The man standing next to me is currently asking you for $500,000 investments." I continued, pacing slowly across the stage, forcing the audience to look at the massive spreadsheet behind me. "He claims he is offering you a historic return on investment. I am here to offer you the truth. If you sign those contracts tonight, your money will not go toward developing a tech campus. It will go directly toward paying off his massive toxic liabilities. She is lying. Derek screamed, his voice cracking wildly. He lunged toward me to grab the microphone, but the two federal agents at the base of the stairs simultaneously placed their hands on their suit jackets, revealing the silver glint of their badges. Derek stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes bulging, as he realized federal law enforcement was actively securing the perimeter of the stage. "Direct your attention to row 14 on the screen," I instructed the crowd, my voice cutting through Derek's hysteria like a scalpel. "These are the Uniform Commercial Code financing statements filed against Vanguard Elite. Derek does not have institutional banking support. He is currently carrying exactly $10 million in high-yield mezzanine debt. The interest rates are predatory, and the principal balance is due in less than 6 days." I paused, letting the massive 8-figure debt sink into the minds of the wealthy investors. I looked directly at the VIP table where the 3 private equity lenders were sitting. Their expressions had turned to stone. They knew the scam was over. "He is functionally bankrupt," I declared, my voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. To secure these loans, he cross-collateralized every single asset he possesses. Row 22 shows a secondary lien on his parents' primary residence. If he does not scam you out of your capital tonight, the bank will foreclose on his childhood home by Monday morning. Let us examine the flow of capital. Row 30 displays a series of obscured limited liability companies registered in Delaware. He has been laundering money to float his minimum interest payments, shifting capital from one anonymous account to another to create a false ledger of profitability. As you can see by the time-stamped routing numbers projected behind me, the corporate accounts for Vanguard Elite are currently overdrawn by $80,000. He cannot even afford the catering for the caviar you are currently eating. The murmurs in the crowd erupted into loud, angry conversations. Several investors slammed their contract binders shut. Chairs scraped against the marble floor as people began to stand up in absolute outrage. "Shut up!" Derek sobbed, tears of pure humiliation streaming down his face. "You have no right to show my private records. This is defamation. I have a partnership with Titan Global." "That brings me to row 40, I said, entirely ignoring his meltdown. I tapped my tablet, and the screen shifted to display the Federal Securities and Exchange Commission Edgar database vendor logs. Derek claims he has an exclusive access partnership with Titan Global. However, federal filings show absolutely zero contractual link between Vanguard Elite and the tech conglomerate. His glossy brochures are completely fabricated. I walked to the edge of the stage and pointed directly at Elias Thorne, who was sitting comfortably at the VIP table. "In fact, I do not expect you to take my word for it. Perhaps you would prefer to hear it directly from the Chief Executive Officer of Titan Global himself. Elias, does this man work for you?" Elias stood up, adjusting his midnight blue tuxedo jacket. He turned to face the outraged crowd, his voice projecting easily without a microphone. "I have never met that man in my entire life," Elias stated, his tone dripping with absolute corporate disdain. "Titan Global has zero affiliation with Vanguard Elite. Any claim to the contrary is entirely fraudulent." The ballroom descended into absolute chaos. Investors were shouting, demanding to know how they had been invited to such a blatant scam. The string quartet packed up their instruments and fled toward the kitchen. Derek fell to his knees on the stage, burying his face in his hands, his perfectly tailored suit wrinkling as he hyperventilated. The Golden Child was completely broken, exposed before the entire city as a desperate insolvent fraud. I stood over him, my face a mask of cold satisfaction. The financial execution was nearly complete, but there was still one more massive liability left to expose. I turned my attention back to the crowd, locating the emerald green dress among the panicked guests. It was time to deal with the lawyer. I watched the emerald green silk part the chaotic crowd. Kendra was practically sprinting toward the stage, her high heels clicking aggressively against the marble stairs. She had spent her entire adult life using her law degree as a weapon to bully people into submission, and she was not going to let her meticulously crafted lifestyle implode without a vicious fight. She shoved past one of the federal agents, completely ignoring the silver badge clipped to his belt, and marched directly up to me. Her face was contorted with absolute fury, her eyes blazing with the desperate arrogance of a woman accustomed to winning on technicalities and intimidation. She snatched the microphone from my hand, turning to face the outraged investors who were still demanding answers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," Kendra announced, projecting her voice with the polished authority of a senior corporate partner. "What you are witnessing is nothing more than a pathetic, hysterical outburst from a disgruntled family member. My sister-in-law has a documented history of severe mental instability. The financial documents she just displayed are entirely fabricated, a desperate attempt to extort money from my husband. I am a senior partner at a top-tier corporate law firm in this city, and I can assure you that Vanguard Elite is completely solvent. Furthermore, we hold the absolute legal authority over the Route 9 property." Kendra turned back to me, lowering the microphone so only I could hear her next words. "You made a fatal mistake tonight, Danielle. You think a fake spreadsheet is going to stop us. We have the general power of attorney. Your mother signed it and I personally notarized it. It is already filed with the county clerk. Derek owns that gas station, and I am going to personally sue you for defamation, tortious interference, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. By the time I am finished litigating this stunt, you will be completely homeless." I did not back away. I reached into my leather portfolio and slowly pulled out 2 pieces of paper. The first was a high-resolution printed copy of the forged power of attorney they had electronically filed. I held it up so the bright stage lights illuminated her official notary stamp at the bottom. "Is this the document you are referring to, Kendra?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. I did not use a microphone, but the sheer coldness of my tone made her flinch. "The document you drafted. The document where my mother forged my signature while you watched, and then you illegally affixed your state notary seal to validate it." Kendra scoffed a harsh, dismissive sound. "Prove it is a forgery," she challenged, her ego blinding her to the trap. "You cannot. It is my word and my official state seal against the word of an unemployed, unstable auditor. The county recognizes that document as ironclad. You have absolutely no leverage here." I handed her the first piece of paper. She snatched it from my hand, crumpling the edge. Then I handed her the second document. "You are an incredibly arrogant lawyer, Kendra," I said, my voice dropping to a surgical, merciless register. "But you are a terrible investigator. You were so eager to steal my property that you never bothered to check the state registry updates from last week. Read the second page. Read the title transfer." Kendra looked down at the second sheet of paper. It was the confirmation of the irrevocable trust executed by Mr. Caldwell at Apex Financial. I watched her perfectly manicured fingernails trace the bold text. I watched her eyes dart across the dates. The timestamp of the trust creation was exactly 3 weeks before the date on the forged power of attorney. "I do not personally own the Route 9 property," I explained, enunciating every single syllable so the reality could shatter her delusion. "I placed the deed into a blind, irrevocable trust. It is a distinct legal entity. Therefore, the power of attorney you drafted, forged, and filed is completely void. You cannot authorize the sale of an asset I do not possess." Kendra stopped breathing. The color rapidly drained from her face, leaving her skin an ashen, sickly gray. Her mouth opened, but her sharp legal vocabulary completely evaporated. She stared at the trust document as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. Her hands began to tremble uncontrollably, rattling the heavy paper. "You did not just forge a useless document." I continued, stepping closer to her, ensuring she felt the full crushing weight of her actions. "By electronically filing that forgery across county lines, you committed federal wire fraud. By affixing your notary seal to a signature you knew was false, you committed notary fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. You are an officer of the court, Kendra. You swore an oath, and you threw it all away to protect a husband who is $10 million in debt." The microphone slipped from Kendra's fingers. It hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, piercing screech of feedback, but she did not even flinch. Her knees buckled slightly, The confident, untouchable corporate predator was gone. In her place stood a terrified woman realizing she was about to lose everything. "The State Bar Association will disbar you by Friday," I stated, delivering the final blows with absolute precision. "Your prestigious law firm will terminate your partnership agreement tomorrow morning to avoid federal complicity. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation, represented by the two agents standing right behind you, will be pursuing a criminal indictment that carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 to 10 years in federal prison." Kendra staggered backward, bumping heavily into the wooden podium. She looked at Derek, who was still kneeling on the floor, weeping, utterly useless. She looked out at the ballroom where the wealthy elite she so desperately wanted to impress were now staring at her with pure disgust. She had built her entire identity on projecting superiority, wealth, and legal dominance. I had just dismantled that identity with 2 pieces of paper and basic accounting principles. She slowly sank to the floor, her emerald green silk dress pooling around her like spilled toxic waste. I looked down at her, feeling no pity, no sympathy, and no regret. The arrogant lawyer was completely destroyed. It was time for the federal agents to finish the job. Elias Thorne stepped over the crumpled microphone cord and picked up the device Kendra had dropped. He tapped it once, ensuring it was still broadcasting, and turned his commanding gaze to the ballroom. The room, previously buzzing with chaotic outrage, fell completely silent. When a billionaire speaks, people listen. As I stated a moment ago, Elias began, his voice projecting a lethal, icy calm. "Titan Global has no partnership with Vanguard Elite. We do not do business with insolvent predatory shell companies. And we certainly do not do business with desperate men who forge legal documents to steal from their own family." Elias walked to the center of the stage, standing directly over Derek, who was still kneeling, paralyzed by his impending ruin. "Titan Global requires absolute stability for our $4 billion expansion. 3 days ago, my executive board finalized our access strategy for the Route 9 corridor. We executed a 99-year commercial lease, securing both surface and subterranean rights. The upfront capital transferred for this lease was $18 million, accompanied by a permanent 2% gross equity stake in the finished technology park." A collective gasp echoed through the ballroom. The investors looked at each other in absolute disbelief. $18 million in upfront cash, plus a perpetual equity stake in a multi-billion-dollar tech hub. It was a staggering financial victory, a level of wealth none of them had anticipated when they put on their tuxedos tonight. Elias raised his free hand and pointed directly at me. "That contract was negotiated, drafted, and signed exclusively by Danielle. She is the sole beneficiary of the irrevocable trust that legally owns the land. She is the only authorized partner of Titan Global in this county. Anyone attempting to sell you shares of that property tonight is actively attempting to steal your money." The ballroom exploded. The polite high society facade completely disintegrated. Wealthy investors began shouting furiously, demanding their earnest money deposits back. Several men rushed the stage, waving their fraudulent investment contracts in the air, screaming at Derek that they were going to sue him into oblivion. Down at the VIP table, the 3 private equity lenders did not yell. They did not need to. The lead lender pulled out his cell phone, his face a mask of absolute financial violence. He dialed a number and spoke loud enough for my audio equipment to pick up. "Trigger the default clauses immediately. Freeze the Vanguard Elite operating accounts. Send the liquidation team to lock down his corporate office and dispatch the foreclosure agents to the residential collateral address. Take everything." My parents' house was officially gone. It was just a matter of hours before the bank changed the locks. Up on the stage, Derek was hyperventilating, his hands pulling frantically at his silk bow tie as if it were suffocating him. "No, no, no," he gasped, crawling backward away from Elias. "There is a mistake. I am the chief executive officer. I have the investors. I can fix this." He bumped hard against a pair of dark gray suit trousers. Derek looked up, his tear-streaked face freezing in absolute terror. The 2 federal agents had quietly ascended the stairs during the chaos and were now standing directly over him. The taller agent reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Derek, the agent, said, his voice loud, firm, and carrying the absolute authority of the federal government. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit federal wire fraud and the forgery of a legal instrument to secure institutional funding. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. Derek shook his head wildly, scrambling backward on his hands and knees. I did not do it. It was my wife, Kendra, drafted the paperwork. My mother signed the name. I just presented it. You cannot arrest me. I am a victim here. He was selling out his own wife and mother in a desperate, pathetic attempt to save his own skin. Down on the floor, Kendra let out a sharp, horrified sob, covering her mouth, as she watched her husband throw her directly to the wolves. The agents did not hesitate. They grabbed Derek by the arms and hauled him roughly to his feet. They spun him around, pinning his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic ratcheting sound of the handcuffs clicking securely into place echoed over the shouting crowd. The golden child, the fake real estate mogul, was now securely bound in steel. His expensive tailored tuxedo jacket bunched up awkwardly around his shoulders, a stark contrast to the criminal reality he was now facing. You have the right to remain silent, the second agent recited, gripping Derek by the bicep. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Danielle, a voice shrieked from the floor. My mother. Patricia broke through the crowd, practically throwing herself against the edge of the wooden stage. Her face was entirely streaked with ruined mascara, her heavy diamond necklace swinging wildly. Tell them to stop! Patricia screamed, her voice tearing at the seams. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. He is your brother, Danielle. You cannot let them take him away. You have $18 million. Pay them off. Do something. My father, Richard, pushed his way up beside her, his face pale and slick with sweat. Please, Danielle. He begged, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of his usual bullying authority. They are going to take our house. The bank is going to take everything. You have to save us. We are your parents. I looked down at them from the stage. I looked at the tears streaming down their faces, the absolute crushing panic in their eyes. For my entire life, they had demanded my obedience, minimized my accomplishments, and demanded I sacrifice my own well-being to prop up their precious son. Tonight, they had come to this gala fully prepared to celebrate the theft of my property. They had gladly forged my signature, entirely willing to leave me with nothing so Derek could have everything. I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at my weeping mother and my broken father. I did not raise my voice. I did not show an ounce of anger or sadness. You made a business decision, I stated coldly, looking directly into my father's eyes. You evaluated the assets, and you decided to leverage your home and your freedom on a fraudulent enterprise. As an auditor, I highly recommend you secure competent legal representation, because my money is locked in a blind trust, and you are no longer recognized as authorized beneficiaries. I turned my back on them. The federal agents began marching Derek across the stage toward the rear exit, his expensive leather shoes dragging across the floor as he sobbed uncontrollably. The investors were still shouting, the private equity sharks were still dialing numbers, and my parents were screaming my name, begging for a lifeline I would never throw. I walked down the opposite side of the stage, joining Elias Thorne, and stepped out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of my toxic family completely behind me. 3 days had passed since the gala. The fallout was not an explosion, but a highly systematic dismantling. At exactly 9 o'clock on Monday morning, the managing partners of Kendra's prestigious corporate law firm held an emergency executive meeting. By 9:15, security personnel arrived at her corner office with empty cardboard boxes. She was given exactly 10 minutes to clear her desk. Her partnership agreement was terminated with extreme prejudice, citing the severe ethical violations and the pending federal criminal investigation. The firm immediately issued a press release to every major financial news outlet in Texas, publicly distancing themselves from her actions and emphasizing their full cooperation with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The State Bar Association did not wait for a criminal conviction. Given the irrefutable evidence of the notarized forgery, The Ethics Committee filed an emergency petition for an interim suspension of her law license, effectively disbarring her pending a formal hearing she was mathematically guaranteed to lose. Kendra was stripped of her title, her income, and her entire professional identity before lunch. Derek was not faring any better. He was currently sitting in a holding cell at the Travis County Correctional Complex, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of his tailored tuxedo. He had been denied bail at his preliminary hearing due to the extreme flight risk associated with his $10 million private equity debt. The mezzanine lenders had moved with terrifying speed. Vanguard Elite Real Estate was officially placed into receivership. The corporate office was locked down. The leased luxury vehicles were repossessed from the parking garage, and every single bank account associated with his name was completely frozen. He was isolated, terrified, and entirely dependent on a public defender who had likely spent less than 10 minutes reviewing his massive, complicated case file. I was sitting in my apartment reviewing the architectural proposals for the new access road submitted by Titan Global when my phone rang. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. I accepted the call fully, anticipating the voice on the other end. "Danielle, it is Kendra. Please do not hang up." Her voice was completely unrecognizable. The sharp, condescending corporate attorney was gone. The woman on the phone sounded hollow, exhausted, and desperately afraid. The background noise indicated she was not calling from her corner office or her luxury condo. She was likely calling from a burner phone in a cheap motel room, hiding from the process servers and the press. I placed the phone on the granite counter and activated the speaker. "I am listening," I replied, my tone clinical and detached. "I filed for divorce this morning." Kendra said the words rushing out of her mouth, as if she were racing against a ticking clock. "I signed the papers. I am cutting all ties with Derek. He manipulated me, Danielle. He lied to me about the extent of his debt. He told me the Titan Global deal was real, and that you were just being stubborn. I was just trying to protect my husband. You have to believe me." She was attempting to shift the entire burden of guilt onto the man she had just abandoned in a federal holding cell. It was a classic legal defense strategy, portraying herself as the manipulated victim rather than the calculating architect of the fraud. "I am not a jury, Kendra," I stated calmly. "You do not need to perform for me." "Danielle, please," Kendra begged, her voice cracking. "I have lost everything. The firm fired me. The Bar Association is moving to disbar me. The federal prosecutors are threatening to charge me with conspiracy and wire fraud. They are talking about a minimum of 5 years in prison. I am a 34-year-old woman. If I go to prison, my life is completely over. I am calling you woman to woman. Please call the federal prosecutor. Tell them you do not want to press charges against me. Tell them Derek coerced me into notarizing the document. If the primary victim refuses to cooperate, they might drop the conspiracy charges and let me plead down to a misdemeanor. You have your $18 million. You won. You do not need to destroy me too." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. The sheer audacity of her request was staggering. She was asking me to commit perjury to save her from the consequences of her own perjury. She had spent years looking down on me, mocking my career, and threatening to bury me in litigation. Now, stripped of her corporate armor, she was begging for the very mercy she had proudly denied others. "Woman to woman," I repeated, letting the phrase hang in the air. "That is an interesting legal strategy. Let us review your actions through that specific lens." I pulled up my encrypted dossier on my laptop, the glow of the screen illuminating my face. "You are a senior corporate attorney. You possess an elite understanding of the law. You utilized that specialized knowledge to draft a general power of attorney specifically designed to strip another woman of her primary financial asset. When I refused your predatory offer, you threatened to use your political connections to have the municipal government seize my property under eminent domain, fully intending to leave me bankrupt. You then stood in my parents' living room and actively participated in the forgery of my signature. Finally, you utilized your official state commission to illegally notarize that forged signature, committing a Class A misdemeanor under the Texas Government Code, which immediately escalated to a federal felony when you electronically filed it across county lines. Danielle, please, I was desperate, Kendra sobbed. You were not desperate, Kendra. You were arrogant, I corrected her, my voice turning to ice. You commingled client retainer funds to float Derek's minimum interest payments. You orchestrated a complex Ponzi scheme using Delaware shell companies to hide his insolvency. You did not do that because you were a victim. You did it because you believed you were smarter than everyone else, and you were willing to destroy my life to maintain the illusion of your own success. I am begging you, Kendra whispered, the sound pathetic and broken. I am an auditor, Kendra, I replied. I evaluate the data, I identify the liabilities, and I report the facts. You are the liability. The federal prosecutor does not need my testimony to convict you. You handed them a digitally time-stamped notarized confession. You built the cage you are currently sitting in. I highly suggest you stop calling me and start negotiating your plea deal. I ended the call and permanently blocked the number. There was no joy in her destruction, only a profound sense of mathematical balance. The ledger was finally cleared. Kendra had gambled her entire legal career on a forged document, and the house had finally collected its debt. The justice system was a cold, unforgiving machine, and she was now caught entirely within its gears. I turned my attention back to the architectural proposals for the tech campus. I had an $18 million empire to manage, and I had absolutely no intention of wasting another second thinking about the woman who had tried to steal it. The execution of Derek's financial ruin was swift and entirely devoid of mercy. The private equity lenders did not grant extensions, nor did they entertain pleas for renegotiation or temporary leniency. The moment Vanguard Elite went into receivership, the cross-collateralization clauses triggered an automated cascade of catastrophic defaults. Because my parents, Richard and Patricia, had blindly co-signed Derek's aggressive mezzanine loans, legally attaching the deed of their primary residence as secondary collateral, the bank initiated an expedited commercial foreclosure. 4 days after the disastrous gala, a team of aggressive asset liquidation agents arrived at my childhood home. They bypassed standard residential eviction timelines by utilizing the predatory commercial clauses Derek had willingly signed to secure his funding. My parents were given exactly 48 hours to pack their personal clothing and basic necessities. Everything else, the antique mahogany dining table where they had viciously humiliated me, the imported Persian rugs, the expensive crystal chandeliers Patricia had spent decades showing off to her wealthy country club friends, was immediately seized by the bank to partially satisfy the massive 8-figure debt. They were physically escorted off their manicured front lawn by armed private security contractors, watching in absolute paralyzed disbelief as heavy steel padlocks were secured to the front doors of the house they had lived in for nearly 40 years. They were instantly reduced from arrogant, affluent suburbanites to displaced debtors, possessing absolutely zero liquid capital. I did not witness the eviction personally. I was far too busy finalizing the purchase of my new primary residence, a sprawling, ultra-secure private estate situated on 20 pristine acres of heavily wooded land overlooking the Colorado River. The property featured a 12-foot reinforced steel perimeter gate, a state-of-the-art biometric security network, and a dedicated 24-hour private security detail composed of former military contractors. It was an absolute fortress, funded entirely by the Titan Global lease revenue. I was sitting comfortably on my sweeping limestone terrace, reviewing a set of municipal tax documents for my newly established philanthropic foundation, when my encrypted two-way radio hummed to life. The head of my security detail informed me that a rusted city taxi had just dropped off 2 individuals at the main gate. They were screaming my name, violently, shaking the iron bars, and aggressively refusing to leave the perimeter. I did not need to check the high-definition surveillance feed to know exactly who it was. I instructed the guards to hold them at the gate and walked slowly down the long, winding paved driveway. I held a single manila folder in my right hand. When the massive iron gates finally came into view, I saw them. Patricia and Richard were clutching a few cheap, overstuffed suitcases, looking ragged, exhausted, and entirely broken. Danielle, my mother shrieked the absolute second she saw me approaching. She pressed her tear-stained face against the iron bars, her hands desperately grasping the cold metal. "You have to open the gate right now. Let us in. The bank took the house, Danielle. They took absolutely everything. We have nowhere to go. We had to sleep in a cheap, filthy motel last night. You have to help us. We are your family." My father stepped up beside her. He tried to summon his old bullying, authoritative tone, but it completely cracked under the sheer suffocating weight of his recent humiliation. "Listen to me, Danielle," he demanded, pointing a violently shaking finger through the bars. "You have $18 million. I know you do." Elias Thorne announced it in front of the entire city. "You can fix this entire mess right now. Call your bank immediately, wire the funds to the private equity firm, and buy our house back. Then you need to hire the absolute best federal defense attorneys in the state for your brother. He is looking at federal prison time. You cannot just stand there in your expensive suit and let your own flesh and blood be completely destroyed. You owe us. We raised you. We provided for you. You are going to step up and save this family right now." I stopped exactly 3 feet from the gate, remaining safely on my side of the reinforced iron boundary. I looked at their desperate, tear-stained faces. They had just lost absolutely everything because of their blind, unwavering devotion to a criminal, yet they were still standing at my gate issuing arrogant demands. They still viewed me as a disposable resource to be exploited, an emergency fund they could easily access by simply screaming loud enough. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the quiet morning air. "I do not have a family. I have 2 highly toxic individuals standing at my gate who spent 33 years treating me like a worthless liability." Patricia gasped, fresh tears spilling rapidly down her cheeks. "How can you say that I am your mother? You were Derek's mother," I corrected her with surgical, merciless precision. "I was simply the scapegoat you kept around to absorb his failures and fund his massive delusions. When I was 18, you drained my college savings to pay off his credit card debt. When I bought the gas station, you called me a hopeless failure and physically threw me out of your house. When Derek desperately needed money, you gladly forged my signature on a legal document fully intending to steal my property and leave me completely bankrupt. You did not care if I ended up homeless on the street. Your only concern was protecting your golden child. Well, your golden child is a documented federal criminal. He built a fraudulent empire on a pathetic foundation of lies, and you willingly co-signed the absolute destruction of your own lives to finance his ego." "But we are blood!" Richard roared, rattling the heavy iron gates with his fists. "You cannot turn your back on your own blood." "I am an auditor, Richard," I replied smoothly. "I evaluate investments based entirely on their historical performance and their future liabilities. Your performance as parents has been a catastrophic failure. You represent an absolute toxic liability to my peace, my finances, and my future. I am officially cutting my losses." I opened the manila folder and slid 2 thick legal documents through the narrow gap between the iron bars. They fluttered down to the asphalt exactly at their feet. "Those are legally binding, court-ordered restraining orders," I explained, watching my father look down at the heavy legal paper in absolute horror. "Mr. Caldwell expedited them through a district judge yesterday afternoon, citing your active documented participation in the forged power of attorney and your immediate proximity to a massive federal fraud investigation. You are legally forbidden from coming within 1,000 feet of my person, my property, or my financial institutions." "Danielle, no." Patricia wailed, collapsing heavily to her knees on the dirty asphalt outside the gate. "Please do not do this. We have absolutely nothing left. If either of you ever contact me again, if you ever show up at this gate, or if you ever attempt to solicit money from me through any third party, I will have my security detail execute an immediate citizen's arrest." I promised, my tone carrying the absolute uncompromising weight of the law. "And I will personally hand the digital surveillance footage of you forging my signature directly over to the federal prosecutor. I am completely disowning you. Do not ever return here." I turned my back on them and nodded to the armed security guards standing silently nearby. Escort them off the private access road immediately, I ordered. If they resist in any way, call the county sheriff and press criminal trespassing charges. I began the long, quiet walk back up the paved driveway toward my sprawling estate. Behind me, the hysterical, sobbing screams of my mother and the furious, impotent shouting of my father slowly faded, entirely drowned out by the harsh, authoritative commands of my security team, forcing them away from the perimeter. I did not look back. I did not feel a single ounce of regret. I had successfully audited my life, removed the toxic liabilities, and permanently secured my empire. 6 months later, the heavy Texas heat shimmered over a stretch of flawlessly paved black asphalt. I gripped the original wooden steering wheel of the 1971 Plymouth Hemi Cuda, feeling the deep, guttural vibration of the massive V8 engine resonating through the pristine black leather seats. The car had spent decades buried in the dark, suffocating in a concrete bunker completely hidden from the world and left to decay. Now fully restored by a team of elite automotive specialists, the flawless violet paint caught the midday sun gleaming like a polished gemstone against the desert landscape. In many ways, driving this incredible machine felt like driving a physical manifestation of my own personal rebirth. We had both been discarded by people who did not understand our value. We had both been underestimated, hidden away, and left to rot in the dark. And we had both emerged from that darkness completely untouchable, radiating a power they could never hope to control. I shifted the heavy chrome gear selector into drive and pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The Cuda surged forward with terrifying, magnificent power, pinning me back against the seat. I was cruising down the Route 9 access corridor, but it was no longer a cracked, weed-infested strip of ruined asphalt. It was a private, multi-lane commercial boulevard funded entirely by the deep pockets of Titan Global, yet legally and perpetually owned by me. As I crested the gentle rise of the road, the 500-acre valley opened up before me like a sprawling mechanical kingdom. The scale of the Titan Tech Park construction was absolutely breathtaking. Giant yellow cranes swung massive steel beams into the sky, laying the framework for futuristic glass towers that would soon house thousands of engineers. A highly synchronized army of workers moved across the site, orchestrating the creation of a $4 billion empire. Every single truck, every piece of heavy machinery, and every worker entering that valley had to cross my land. And with every crossing, my 2% equity stake cemented my generational wealth. My life over the past 6 months had transformed into a masterpiece of absolute tranquility. My bank accounts were thoroughly fortified, managed by Mr. Caldwell and his elite team at Apex Financial. My sprawling riverfront estate was a fortress of peace, completely devoid of the screaming, the manipulation, and the suffocating guilt that had defined my first 33 years on this earth. My phone never buzzed with aggressive demands or fabricated emergencies. The block lists on my devices were permanent, and the legal restraining orders remained in full, absolute effect. I had not spoken a single word to my former family since the morning I left my parents standing outside my iron gates. I did not need to speak to them to know how their ledgers had balanced. The legal and financial updates occasionally filtered through Mr. Caldwell purely for security purposes. Derek was currently sitting in a federal penitentiary awaiting his criminal trial, facing a mountain of irrefutable wire fraud charges that guaranteed he would not see the outside of a cell for the next 10 years. Kendra had been officially and permanently disbarred by the state of Texas. Stripped of her corporate armor and her 6-figure salary, she was finalizing her divorce while working as a basic legal assistant in a suburban strip mall, drowning in the massive debt Derek had left behind. My parents had been forced to move into a tiny subsidized apartment on the far edge of the city, living entirely on their modest Social Security checks. The facade of the Golden Child and the affluent suburbanites had completely shattered. They had gambled their entire existence on a lie, and the market had aggressively corrected them. I slowed the Cuda down as I approached the private security checkpoint that separated my road from the Titan construction zone. The heavily armed guards immediately recognized the violet classic car and offered a sharp, respectful salute as they opened the massive steel gates. I offered a polite nod in return, turned the steering wheel, and merged onto the highway heading back toward my estate. As an auditor, I had spent my entire professional career calculating the return on investment for massive corporate entities. I had analyzed profit margins, assessed risk mitigation, and identified toxic liabilities that threatened to sink multi-million-dollar portfolios. When Elias Thorne wired $18 million into my trust account, the world would naturally assume that was the greatest return on investment I had ever achieved. They would look at the massive influx of capital, the perpetual equity stake, and the sprawling real estate, and they would call it a financial masterpiece. But they would be entirely wrong. The $18 million was simply the byproduct of a much more important transaction. The greatest return on investment I ever made was conducting a ruthless, uncompromising audit of my own life. For 33 years, I had carried the massive, crushing liability of a family who viewed my existence as nothing more than a tool to prop up their own fragile egos. I had allowed their constant criticism to depreciate my self-worth. I had allowed their emotional manipulation to drain my mental energy. When I finally decided to cut the dead weight, when I stopped absorbing their failures and started investing entirely in myself, my personal valuation skyrocketed. True family is not determined by a shared bloodline or a common last name. Blood is simply a biological coincidence. True family is defined by mutual respect, unwavering support, and the consistent choice to value your presence. If the people sitting at your dining room table require you to shrink yourself so they can feel large, they are not your family. They are a bad investment. And as any competent auditor will tell you, you must liquidate bad investments before they bankrupt your soul. I pressed the accelerator again, the roar of the Hemi engine drowning out any lingering echoes of my past. The road ahead was wide open, completely clear, and entirely mine. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to make the difficult decision to audit your own life and walk away from toxic people, I want you to leave a comment below and share your victory. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and never forget that your peace of mind is the most valuable asset you will ever own. Protect it at all costs and keep driving forward.